Welcome to Sherlock Monthly, everyone. I still have Mondays on my script. That's funny. Like, there's like all these vestiges of Mondays I have everywhere. That's why there was that pause. Monthly. Welcome to
Vestiges of Mondays is my new
Yes.
indie rock band.
I'm changing it right now. Welcome to Monthly, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are going on a monthly biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. Today's episode is The Adventure of the Priory School. And joining me for this episode are two co-hosts. So welcome back to Mary Alcaro. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Ed.
And a new co-host for all of you, Nick Martorelli. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Ed. Hi, Mary. I'm excited to be here.
All righty. I've been told that the snark is happening today, so let's hope we
We'll
can
see
all.
what Mary says.
All right.
Oh, it's about me.
Yeah. Well, for 30 weeks, as you all know, 2023, 24, we deduced, deciphered, dissected Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes adventures in a kind of conversational annotation with lots of alcohol to fuel us along the way. You can see all those episodes on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. Now we are continuing the Biblioventure in a monthly series, and one or two co-hosts join me every month for these. If you're watching live right now, thank you guys for watching live. I see you all out there. Um, use the live chat, have fun in the live chat. You know the rules. Have fun and be nice to each other, and that's it. I guess that's two things. That's two rules. If you are watching the recording, I also asked you to like these videos, subscribe to this channel, and you're welcome to leave comments under the videos, and I will answer those when I do see them. Also, everyone, if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach or by becoming a member. You can do this at our website, Rosenbach, at the Rosenbach website. I'm actually putting links in the chat. We're doing a little sprucing up of our website as this show is airing live, and you may wind up having trouble accessing some of the things on it, but you won't have trouble accessing the links that I've just put in the live chat. They will go direct to the places that you need to go. Also, and if you're looking for the Sherlock Monthly page today, like, oh, what was on the page today and what's coming up? Yeah, again, there might be for a couple days here little issues finding it, but we'll be up back and running with everything on our website very soon.
New year, new look.
Yes, and it's going to be great. And Sherlock Monthly is also brought to you by the generous support of Lisa Washington, one of our favorite patrons who donates money to the Rosenbach and helps us out to put these shows on. Well, let me give formal introductions today. Mary Alcaro needs none because she was a Sherlock Mondays co-host, but I'll give it anyway. You were a co-host on the Sherlock Mondays series. Our audience knows you well from that. You are currently a visiting assistant professor of literatures at Bryn Mawr College. And I'm from Philadelphia, so I know how to pronounce Bryn Mawr. An avid Sherlockian, Mary has been invested in the Baker Street Irregulars and the Adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes, and is the head mastiff of the Sons of the Copper Beeches in Philadelphia. So I'm very happy that that has happened, Mary. She's written lots of things on Sherlock, of course, and you are the bartender, Mary,
I
creating
am.
the fabulous Sherlock tales we drank on Sherlock Mondays. I have not continued the Sherlock tales for the monthly series because I just drink whatever I feel like drinking that day. Today I'm drinking beer. Well, I'm drinking nut brown ale, Samuel
Oh,
Smith nut brown ale. It's very delicious. And I've got a couple tatty porters to go along with that. I figure as long as we're hitting the inn, the countryside inn, I should be drinking this kind of stuff. Nick, you are muted, so I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I knew that. I was just reserving. I was practicing. I was warming up.
That's
I was
okay.
getting ready.
he's doing a scale.
Well, Nick Martorelli, everyone, is an active Sherlockian in the New York City area, where he is the headmaster, a headmastiff, and a headmaster today of the Scion Society, the Priory Scholars of New York City. And he leads their story discussion. He has spoken at Scintillation of Scions, Jubilee 221B, Bookmakers of Toronto, the annual BSI dinner. His discussion of why Irene Adler is Boba Fett. Sherlock Holmes can be heard on episode 146 of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, hosted by our good friends Scott Monty and Burt Wolder. Nick's a non-Sherlockian theatrical writing has been performed at the Red Bull Theater, the Chain Theater, the Delaware Fringe Festival, Spokane Falls Community Center. He's a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, and he has an upcoming play that he might tell us about. Hi, Nick.
Hello, hello. Yes, the Chain Theater Winter One Act Festival. My writing partner Justin Mushong and I have written and I have produced and are putting up a play called The Tragedy of Prohibition, brought to you by Beamer's Beer. It's a it's a 15-minute one act all about the greatest tragedy to ever befall our country, prohibition.
Prohibition.
Sponsored by Beamer's
And
Beer.
and it's like you have a real beer sponsor for your play. I love that.
No, it's not quite a real beer sponsor, but it is a beer sponsor. So it's a 15-minute Greek tragedy. Yes.
Know the lore.
It's a 15-minute Greek tragedy of, as we describe it, heightened language and hashtag sponsored content.
All right.
So, there are 3 performances in February. We're kind of at the end of them, and they actually are sold out in person. But there is a streaming performance on February 19th. The ticket will be available for a couple days. The show will be available for a couple days after that. So use code BEER25 for a discount.
All righty.
Hashtag drink Beamer's beer.
Hashtag drink Beamer's beer. Hashtag study Beamer's beer.
I will put that link into the chat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're working with the Chain Theater sponsors this one act festival. They are lovely. Our cast is phenomenal. And we are one play in a series of 4. So that ticket will get you 4 new theatrical works, one of which is The Tragedy of Prohibition, brought to you by Beamer's Beer.
All righty. In 2 different tweets here. There you go. Or not tweets, chats, whatever, comments in the chat. There we go. Nick, it's fun to have you here for this. Tell us about a little bit about the Priory Scholars. Obviously, the name of this story inspired the name of there, and tell us about the Priory Scholars and your involvement.
Sure. The Priory Scholars is a very old Sherlockian sign. It goes back to 1954. Chris Steinbrenner, when he was a student at Fordham University, founded it. And it was originally the Priory Scholars of Fordham. And then when he graduated, it became the Priory Scholars of New York City and has been in New York, obviously, ever since. And it's kind of gone through booms and busts throughout the years. There are times when it lies dormant, but around 2012, Judith Freeman, another active Sherlockian in New York, Judith Freeman asked me and Matt Laffey to help her restart the group and bring it back from one of its great hiatuses. And so we started off with 2 meetings a year. We're now up to 3. And that was, goodness, that was 13 years ago. And so we inherited the name. We resurrected the name. We're celebrating the name. All of our meetings are based around a single story. People come with toasts to things in the story. We just have a discussion. There is a quiz. And it was actually for our 60th anniversary that we read and discussed the Priory School as a little celebratory moment for ourselves.
And I assume that, that's a story like Copper Beaches, Mary and I, the Sons of the Copper Beaches. Like, I feel like if I don't know everything about the Copper Beaches, then I'm bad Sherlockian. Do you is this the case with you guys or not?
You mean the group in general?
Yeah, like, do you feel like you need to know this story inside? What I'm doing is setting the bar.
I understand. I feel the trap closing on me.
He's walking straight into it.
Straight into it. But like I in all seriousness, no, I don't. I don't think that, I think the only thing you need to do to become a member of the Priory Scholars is show up.
There you go.
Like, that is truly it. Like, if you read, and I always, as I lead the discussions and as I sort of host the meetings, I always have in my mind that our meeting may be someone's first. Some Sherlockian may have found us on the internet and or know a friend, and our meeting may be their absolute first trip into the Sherlockian world in general.
Hmm.
So I always want to sort of like focus with that idea. Is like we've read a specific story for this meeting, and that's 15 pages. And I want someone who's only read those 15 pages of the canon to feel smart, to feel like they can participate, to feel like they can have conversations with the people at their table, like that there is no to feel a little overwhelmed by the minutia of the quiz, like but to feel challenged by that potentially, but overall like really to feel like there is no test, there is no prerequisite for being part of the fun. All you have to do to be part of the fun is read the words and show up.
Good. I like that. Yeah. And I hope that's how we try to do this show. We try to make sure that it appeals to equally people who, have read the story 100 times and people who are just coming to it for the first time. So that will be what we do today, I hope. Especially as we annotate and talk about things.
Yes.
I never talk about stories after the one we're published after the one we're doing as we're doing it. We could talk about links to other stories, but if it hasn't been published until after this one, well, then we leave that for people to discover. And hopefully I'll get to those stories over the course of the next few years. Switching this to a monthly show means a multi-year commitment to finish all of these stories. Well, let's begin with this one. Oh, before we begin, Claire Danes in Australia, a really fun Sherlockian poet in Australia, was writing these little poems about every story that we covered in the Sherlock Mondays, and she's continued that. And she had one. She posted it on our Facebook group, Sherlock Monthly Facebook group, which you can all join. And here for her poem for Priory School is Tweedledee stole Tweedledum with horses shod like cattle. For Tweedledee, the bantling's son, knew father would not tattle. But German master saw them go and caused a murderous blunder, which frightened wayward bantling so he fled to parts down under. So I like that. Thank you, Claire.
Phenomenal.
Always fun. Always fun. The
That is so
Bantling
good.
Son.
Love
James
this.
Wilder. I like that. So, all righty. Now we can begin. This story published January 30, issue 1904 in the US in Collier's magazine, and the Strand magazine in February 1904, which both of those would have come out around the same time, like the middle of January. The Collier's cover is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of these great Frederick Dorr steel illustrations with Holmes out here in the countryside with the hat, and it's William Gillette
Yeah.
is the idea for all of Dorr Steele's Sherlocks. So that coat there, the coat's almost like is that a winter coat or is that a dressing gown? Or I wonder if like did you originally start this as a dressing gown and then you modified it and put a hat on him? But it is a very even gloves he's wearing.
I
So
love the texture of the coat.
yeah, yeah, that looks really nice. So.
Yeah.
And there's something ominous about the birds in the background hovering. There's a group of them down here, and then there's just two up here in the clouds. Here's the Holderness coat of arms with the Saltier. Is that right? And that's why he's the Lord Saltier's because that's the is that the blue going across this way is a
I should know my heraldry. Oh dear.
Come on, if you like, if we're gonna be a medievalist,
I
this is the
know.
kind of stuff we're gonna rely on you for.
I know.
Uh, but at the for the past couple issues, a couple stories, there's been skulls featured in the title in the top of the page, and this time they've just gone with this, crest, crest of arms for the Duke, which isn't as exciting. There should be a skull or two a hidden skull would have been good in this title here.
Too
Uh,
many skulls would be a little too spoilery.
Just one skull. This is a one skull story. Uh,
Not a three-pipe problem, but a one skull problem.
um, and I posted this on our webpage too, which may or may not be accessible this day, but it will be soon if it's not already. And if you actually go through it, what's wonderful about this is it still includes all the advertisements, which are nice.
Wait a minute. Are you like a man in a sack?
Are you? Are you like a
I
man?
think no.
So, and this is if you are like hampered in the race for success. And so you can do these correspondence schools and learn how to become a navigator, a bookkeeper, an ad writer, and an architect. Sure, you could just be an architect instead of trying to get through life in a sack.
I don't know what I expected it to be selling, but it is not this.
Not that. Not architectural school?
No, it's not what I don't know what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't a civil engineering license.
But all of their advertisements,
So good.
vapocresylene, cocoa butter, books, watches, jewelry, um, it's
Oh,
just it's
so
all fun
good.
through these
The
kind.
Milo the barbell. Look at him.
I
He's
like the see the living music box a couple pages
yeah,
ago.
with the bird. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was good.
Yeah, and I especially like that because it's get yourself an actual bird. Um Guaranteed day and night singers. There you go. So why bother to get a music box when you can get a live animal that will do this?
I love seeing these pages because like we as Sherlockians read these stories out of like musty hardbound
Yep.
books, you
Yep.
know, and they have the I'm an English major, so I can say they have the stink of literature upon them.
Yes.
You know, like they are serious detective stories. And when you see them laid out like this, it feels a lot more like they were at that time. It feels a lot more sort of
Yeah.
like how they would have been treated, which is sort of like, and I was going to say an Ellery Queen mystery magazine, but like also that, the articles, the fiction that is in Men's Health,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something like that. It is a little kind of like, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, sorry. Nope. I just saw the ambitious men and women embalming and funeral directing.
Yeah.
And
This is
realized that you all couldn't see me gesturing off to the left.
a correspondence school of undertaking and embalming. You just learn how to do it by mail. There you go.
Horrifying. Horrifying. $9 cash for a diamond ring.
Hey.
And this is like juxtaposed with, I'm looking at the text of the story. This is juxtaposed with like, oh yes, this is like Holmes solving the case at the end. So like it's this really like it's that kind of thing that reminds you where the stories come from
Right
and sort
here.
of thinking about, yeah,
Discovery of this man Heidegger's dead body. Wait a minute, you want to become an embalmer?
yeah. Brought to you by Beamer's Beer, like it
The OG pop-up ads,
Well, I highly recommend people to look through these and see the stories this way. It's always interesting
Beautiful.
to see how they're originally published. Here's the Strand magazine cover. The Strand's always the same cover until sometime like 1920s, late 30s. I think they finally changed their cover and they do different things. But until then, it's always this shot of the street. The text changes a little bit. But just like the last story that was published, The Solitary Cyclist, Conan Doyle again shares the top of the page here with W. Jacobs, an author famous enough at the time to share the masthead with Doyle to advertise the story, his stories. And now, has anybody read anything besides The Monkey's Paw? I don't think so, but it's at the time he was the author that would use to sell the issue along with Doyle.
I'm looking at that fries, cocoa, and milk ad and wondering if that if that was product placement for Watson later. Watson, there's cocoa in the other room, right?
There you go. And it's even C page, and I have to look this up because I don't have the advertising pages for the Strand magazine. C page 22 of the advertising section, and you know. So like
That is absolutely giving Beamer's beer
they
presents.
Yeah,
should have.
isn't it?
They should have like gone right to that page in the story. It didn't, but it should have. That would have been
Like, Watson, there's some fries cocoa for you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you.
I mean, I think so much like Conan Doyle does not feel above product placement, right? Like just, oh, you want me to mention it? Done. We're gonna.
Yeah. He's like, I don't like these guys anyway.
they
Doing
can
this
absolutely,
for money.
they can absolutely have some fries cocoa. Yeah.
the Alrighty. Well, we can get right into the story now. It's one of the more dramatic, funny openings of a story. Watson says we have had some dramatic entrances and exits upon our small stage at Baker Street, but I cannot recollect anything more sudden and startling than the first appearance of Dr. Thorneycroft Huxtable,
What a name.
MA, PhD, etc. If you didn't already want to read this story, his name is Thorneycroft Huxtable. And then he faints, and then he just faints on the floor. So large, so pompous, and so dignified that he was the very embodiment of self-possession and solidity. Um, I like that. I like that, I like that us big fat guys used to seem like we were self-possessed and solid in the 19th century. And now, now I'm not. But
Well, there's also the moment immediately following. We had sprung to our feet, and for a few moments we stared in silent amazement. And then they spring into action.
yeah, yes. Well, and it's at this
piece of
ponderous
wreckage.
piece of wreckage.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
I feel like, guys, I'm right here. I can hear you.
Oh, we continue. That's like a whole long metaphor. At this ponderous piece of wreckage, which told of some sudden and fatal storm far out on the ocean of life. Doyle's really laying it on thick, and that's where Watson is, and I love that. But he also falls at the beginning of that, this majestic figure, prostrate and insensible, upon our bearskin hearth rug. Um, a hearth rug is mentioned a few times in the stories, but this is the first and only time it mentions that it is a bearskin hearth rug. And I wonder if it has the head on it or not. Do you think it's one of those with the bear head, like at the end? But we don't know.
It's one of those like I'm just picturing like all those 1970s like ads with like what's his face? Tom Selleck like on the rug, like it's giving
Hey, that's your go-to. Tom Selleck lying on
my
a heart.
go-to.
It says a lot. It says more about you than it says about this. But
It's just saying that advertising works.
yeah. But who has a bearskin hearthrug is what I'm wondering. Like,
England.
Is this unusual? Because there's no bears in England, so is this an imported product? And so it's kind of a luxury good in a sense, but I don't know. All I know, bearskin rugs could have been kind of cheap, and it was just because it's a heavy kind of fur. It's like it's not a nice soft fur bearskin. Like I'm a bear expert, like I know bears or hunt bears, but
Ed just pets them.
yeah. But that's what I've read about them. And but it's a hearthrug. For people who don't realize, a hearthrug needs to be this kind of heavier rug because it's protecting the flooring if anything sparks out. I mean, you might think, well, isn't the bearskin rug just going to catch on fire then? Shouldn't you have? But it would probably, a little cinder would burn itself out in there and not spread. But you don't want your nice rugs damaged. You certainly don't want your nice floors damaged,
Well, and
especially.
I imagine the skin is less flammable
Yeah.
than like a fabric would be.
Mm-hmm.
Something like flax would go up immediately. So you
Yeah.
have to worry about like the texture of what you've got on the floor there. You want it both insulating and also slightly fire sort of retardant. Skin would do that.
it did bring to mind for me this picture of Doyle in his room at his house in
On a bearskin.
Dolsham. And look on his floor. It's a tiger and it's got the head, like the open mouth. Um, this was the house at Windlesham that he went to after Undershaw.
My God.
Um, and this is like part of the billiard room. Um, I've heard this listed. It was the music room, and I was like, that is the most man cave music room I've ever seen. And then I realized that it's wrong. That was like it's not. It's actually part of the billiard. On the other side of this room, I think there's a billiards table. Um, and but like the elk or the many pointed deer up here on the wall. He's not, and the type. He's not. I don't think Doyle was a big game hunter. I think that he did. He loved fox hunting. Um, and he did the seal and the whale hunt because he was on that voyage when he was a young man. But he wasn't one of those big game hunt. He didn't like go to India and Africa and shoot large animals, as far as I know. So this is kind of a real pose situation that like, yes, the tiger, skin rug here.
Very giving British Empire vibes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
this is an empire writer, right? This is like I would think Kipling would
Kipling, yeah.
like
Well,
this is the room.
it's so much and this opening too has this sort of like, how do we do something that is very serious and contrast it with something that is silly? And
Mhm.
like the description of Dr. Huxtable on one hand, like this whole beginning is sort of like setting something up, and then it's funnier than that. We're setting something up, and this giant of a man collapses onto the rug where the mouth is at him. Like, and it's and like, for me, this beginning is Doyle is intentionally kind of like playing with that juxtaposition of something serious versus something trifling as an overuse, but like it is funny, it is serious. And
Mhm.
even when they, Holmes gets a pillow for him and Watson gets brandy, and then he asks for milk and biscuits. And I'll be fine. I'll be fine, Mr. Holmes. There's even that moment where it's like, oh, it's exhaustion, I think. It's like, no, 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 I'm fine. I'm fine. Please come with me right now. And like there's farcical elements here in the beginning, which I think is part of the dramatic entrance,
Yeah.
because other people have come into or left Baker Street brushing the top of the door frame or bending a poker as they leave. But this is the guy who rushes in and then collapses.
Keeps it all together, gets inside, maintains his dignity, and then becomes supremely undignified.
Had sent up his card and everything. His
Yeah.
card arrived before him.
Yep. Yep. Even though he's rushing into collapse. Yeah. It's a very cool juxtaposition, Nick. Absolutely.
Yeah. And before Holmes rifles his pockets, you mentioned he brings the cushion for his head, and then Watson, of course, brandy.
The Brandy.
Quick, the brandy. I did a little search. Um, this is the eighth, and I'm thinking like, oh well, that's from the time, but is it really in all the stories? Yeah, it's in a lot of stories. This is the eighth time brandy has been used as a cure for somebody in the stories. Blue Carbuncle, James Ryder at the end. In Speckled Band, Julia Stoner is brought brandy by her murderer, her Dr. Roylott, when she first collapses. Victor Hatherley, after having his thumb cut off, gets brandy from Watson. Mr. Malus, after almost suffocating in fumes in Greek Interpreter, gets brandy. Percy Phelps, because, he's just a wuss, yeah, and passes out every, other page, needs brandy. Um, and Henry Baskerville gets brandy from Lestrade after he collapses, and in an empty house, Watson gets brandy from Holmes after the first and only time he fainted in his life. It'll happen, and then this story, it'll happen 1, 2, 3, 4 more times for a total of 12 brandy cures in the adventure in all the stories of Sherlock Holmes. And there's 3 other times where people just drink brandy, like, yeah, I was having a brandy,
On purpose.
but not, yes, not like as a cure. But it's not me. Yes, brandy is used as a and as it was listed as a way to quicken the pulse, a way to resuscitate someone, and I wish that was still done. But
Yeah,
And
why
Watson
have
does,
smelling salts when you can have brandy?
and Watson does talk about his thin, thready pulse. So
Yes.
yes,
He does.
so please, are there any doctors watching? I'm totally fine if you want to give me brandy if I collapse. If you want to try that first, I'll probably be fine. Actually, that'll probably work.
And if that doesn't, milk and biscuits for sure.
Or use bourbon. I think I'd probably prefer bourbon if you're, but hey, that's up to you. Okay, it's a doctor.
Doctor's discretion. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, once he's had his milk and biscuits and seems to be fine.
Well, and after Holmes has rifled his pockets and found a return ticket and I don't know, maybe some loose change that Watson didn't include in here. But had
deleted scenes.
milk and a biscuit. And he has a case that Holmes has to help, and Holmes refuses because he's already working on, and we all love this, 2 unrecorded cases mentioned. The case, and he even calls this case of the Ferrers documents and the Abergavenny murder. I'm not Welsh, sorry. The Abergavenny murders, or murder, that is going to trial, and Holmes is involved in these. Abergavenny's a Welsh town with an old Norman castle, and Adrian Conan Doyle wrote a pastiche, Dark Angels or something like that. It's like any Adrian Conan Doyle one. It's kind of, like you could be like, yeah, this is just like these stories.
Hey, it worked for his father,
Father,
just the
that he just
remixing to
kind of
save a
Mixing, yeah.
couple
changed the things
plots.
around a little bit. But and there are, oh, and I discovered there Burke Cools, of course, wrote pastiches of these for the radio Sherlock Holmes that Clive Merrison starred in as Sherlock. And there is a Ferrers one, and there is a Abergavenny one that you can listen to. So we know. Somebody did discover what those cases were. I like to put all that that BBC radio Sherlock Holmes as those unrecorded cases were actually the ones.
Radio show. Yes.
There you go.
I think this is less a refusal and more an outright bluff, right? This is like, well, it would have to be a pretty important case, Dr. Huxtable. I've got all this other stuff going on.
You're right, because Huxtable doesn't say what's going on. He's just like, something is so important. You have to come with me right now.
Yep.
And Holmes says, there's no possible way I could do that. What's going on? Huxtable explains himself, and then Holmes leaves immediately. Like,
yeah.
Once Holmes figures out, like, here's the case, he does not care about the Ferrers or the Abergavenny murder. He is off to Holderness.
He must. I mean, like this ridiculous man has some kind of ridiculous case, and I don't want to be involved in it.
Yeah.
And, finding the lost pencil case.
Pencils. Yeah.
Yes. So
especially after that entrance, and he's like, he has that moment. He's already had the moment where he's like, "Oh, you might recognize me from this very obscure publication that I did." Like, and Holmes is like, "Okay, buddy, all right, yeah, no, I'm super busy." And then he's like, "Oh shit, you're the headmaster of the most prestigious school in the country. Tell me more." Like, yeah.
Well, and it's also the Duke of Holderness. As soon as he hears that, Holmes looks him up. This man is certainly one of the greatest subjects of the crown.
And the richest.
Yeah, like I can't tell if Holmes is being sarcastic there, because it is true. Rich and powerful means great, but especially the way Holmes will now behave to the rest of the story about the Duke.
About money, yeah.
And we know that he doesn't, he can be himself quite snarky when it comes to aristocrats. but he goes through that, and then there's also that he's promised a check for £5,000 to the person who tells him where his son is, and another 1,000 to get the people who have taken him. And then like, so does that weigh into, we'll talk about the end when he gets money, which is hilarious. But is the fact that, hey, I can make £6,000 on this and be set up for a few years?
It has to, because that's the order of operation. He talks about it's the Duke. Oh, okay. And not only that, Mr. Holmes, the Duke has offered him a reward. It is a princely offer. Watson, I think we shall go with him. Like, that is the thing that says that lets Holmes then turn to Huxtable and say, now please tell me what's happened.
Yeah.
Like, now and like, and Huxtable has also previously had this moment of like, I know that you are prepared, Mr. Holmes, to work for the work's sake, but there is a huge reward in this case.
Yeah.
And Holmes is like, a huge reward, you say? Tell me more.
Exactly. He doesn't say, well, this is most mysterious, or I must do this for queen and country. That is a princely offer. Let's go.
Especially you, Ed, you mentioned like, this man is certainly one of the greatest subjects of the crown. And the next thought is not, we have to help him.
Right.
It is, yes, you're right. This man is important. And that's kind of where Holmes stops.
Yeah. It should be, a child, let me help. Like,
well, he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that yet.
Oh, right. Just his son is all we know.
Yes. Well, he does know the abduction of the only son. So he does know that his son is involved. Yes. But
yes,
which you might assume was a child. But
true. Yeah, he knows it's about the abduction, but he fixates on the cabinet minister, on the Duke. Holmes does, and that's when they get to it. Yes,
I think it's because the guy asking has written Huxtable's sidelights.
Perhaps that may recall my name to you.
Remember? Oh, you're that Huxtable? Sidelights on Horace?
But this is also.
Can you sign my copy?
This is also not unreasonable, because have we done the resident patient yet? Where Watson actually does recognize the guy by his work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not unreasonable that Sherlock Holmes could actually know this book.
Yeah.
I think it's also very funny to sort of think about, like, I'm looking at you, Mary, to think about sort of like an academic just being like, oh my God, I need your help. Oh, I wrote this thing.
I wrote this thing. You want to read it?
Perhaps you've heard my name. I wrote one book, like
47 kinds of tobacco ash.
Yeah.
It's exactly that move too, which is very funny. It's like, this is my obscure little thing that makes me king of the castle of a book that like 10 people know about.
Although I am getting out of order. That line comes next. We haven't actually heard that yet. It is when Holmes says, what's going on? That Huxtable starts explaining the school. Oh, and I wrote this book. Perhaps you've heard of it. Yeah.
I guarantee you they have not.
And then we get mentions here of that the school is very famous. And it, one of the biggest schools in his book, and then the family story. Well, we get the first mention of Wilder here, Mr. James Wilder, his secretary, the young Lord Saltire, and he's 10 years old. We discover the boy has been abducted. The Duke's marriage has not been a peaceful one, and they're separated now. The boy's
scandalous.
Mother, yeah,
scandal, like totally, like he just sort of drops that information in, and you can sort of understand why, among other reasons, the Duke is sort of pissed that yet another person has been brought into his private affairs. Like, this seems like not a great thing that this very high-profile figure is having marital problems to the point that she has moved out.
Yeah,
I do like, though, the moment that Huxtable has where. I will tell you, I'm breaking a confidence in sharing this, but in this situation, I can't trust you halfway.
Yeah.
Like, I have to tell you everything, Mr. Holmes, even the stuff that is my confidential knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Which is great. It makes him a very good client, because we've seen Holmes refuse to deal with people and throw up his hands about people who will either withhold information, not give real identities, because Holmes himself says, right, I already have enough to handle with one mystery. I can't have mystery on both sides, which makes Huxtable a very good client to just get everything out on the table.
And also a really good vessel for the storytelling to have Huxtable be the client instead of the Duke.
Yes.
Because the doctor has asked Holmes to become involved, Holmes is interacting with someone different than when rich and famous people come to Holmes and ask for help. Holmes has a very different attitude towards helping them and towards taking their cases. But this is the comically fainting man from the beginning. And those two things to an English major have to be linked, right? This man who came in and fainted and then is super embarrassed is now asking for help on someone else's behalf.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about mystery story too here, is that as a mystery story hasn't been really codified yet, and while it's still being formed of the things you include when you're writing a mystery, but Doyle's one of those people that does establish that, and in these stories especially, it's they need to see all the clues early, as many clues as I can give them early on, and mention all the people involved early on, and the mother's separate, the separation in the marriage can serve as one of those red herrings, of course, that that everybody will think that might have something to do with it, and Holmes will immediately rule it out. Like, he knows the right questions to ask to rule it in or out right off the bat. But also in the manuscript, the manuscript exists. It's in the collection of Glenn Moranker right now. He owns the 3 manuscripts in a row for is it Priory School? Yeah, it's Solitary Cyclist Priory School and Black Peter.
And I had forgotten that Solitary Cyclist is right before this,
Yeah.
so we get 2 bicycle stories in a row.
Yeah. Oh
the
yeah.
newest, hottest technology.
The
Ripped from the headlines.
Doyle is so all over bicycles right now at this point. He's loving bicycles.
Not if you're a woman, because that's dangerous.
He just wants to write it. Yeah, so, well, anybody
could women on bikes.
Anybody could be chasing you on a bicycle, young lady.
You can't put our ladies on bikes. They're going to get ideas. And then they're going to want to vote.
But in the manuscript, there are several longer lines about Wilder throughout this, and that he cuts out, as if like I can't put too much focus on him. I need to take the focus off of him. I don't want people thinking about him this early in the story. And I think there was a longer line about him shortly after that we needed to take out. But he does mention the separation of marriage, and I think that then that's going to be one of the things that the readers, in trying to solve a mystery themselves and reading these stories, will be considering.
Oh yeah, we've got a lot of stuff. We've got the broken up marriage. We've got the missing bicycle. We've got the foreigner who is suspiciously quiet and mysterious.
Heidegger, the German master here, that nobody likes anyway. He's not a popular guy there.
He's morose and he's silent, so we don't know what's going on with him, but he's not from here.
And that's the story. And he tells Holmes the story. The kid disappears. Heidegger disappeared. His bike is gone. And then he wants Holmes, Mr. Holmes, if ever you put forward your full powers, I implore you to do so now, for never in your life could you have a case which is more worthy of them. Of course, everybody thinks this about
everyone thinks their case is super worthy.
Holmes had, and we get into these listening postures. I love mentioning these because this is a standard of a Holmes story that always gets included. He had listened with the utmost intentness to the statement of the unhappy schoolmaster. His drawn brows and the deep furrow between them showed that he needed no exhortation to concentrate all his attention upon a problem which, apart from the tremendous interest involved, must appeal so directly to his love of the complex and the unusual. Here, interestingly enough, he takes out a notebook and starts taking notes, and I don't think that has ever happened in the beginning of a story. I welcome people to correct me on that. I think this is the first time. Usually his listening posture is purely, I'm just thinking about this, and now I have several questions in which I'm going to solve it in my head right now. But rarely does he take notes in the beginning.
It's
I
also
know.
interesting that he
I think
sounds,
never actually.
yeah, that he sounds interested, that he looks interested here, because normally we get this sort of the contrast where Watson says, he looks like he's not listening. He looks like he's asleep. He's got the tips of his fingers together and he's sort of like languidly just sort of postured, and Watson tells us, but don't be fooled, like he's really actually listening intently. Here we actually get the visual cues, right, of the like he is intently listening, the brows are furrowed, he's directly engaged, he's taking notes.
But we still get the Watson knows him better than anyone else because this is the physical language he's exacting. And I know he needs no encouragement to take this case, which is what Huxtable had done just a sentence ago. So that's a great point, Mary. And it's also a little bit of both because Watson's was like, yeah, I recognize the signs. Yeah.
And that the case is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Holmes loves the outre, right? If there's something unusual, and this seems unusual, they can't figure it out. Holmes immediately berates Huxtable because he can call him in sooner. Now, I can't the crime scene is days old. 3 days have been wasted.
Yeah.
And then he starts asking the questions like in quick succession, another bicycle missing, and he's figuring it out right away.
Well, he asks here one of my favorite questions that he asks, which is, what do you think happened? And Huxtable has, well, it's obviously this, Mr. Holmes. And Holmes is like, well, if that's true, this other thing doesn't make sense. Or if that's true, you haven't thought of this piece. And I love the moments in the stories where you see how Holmes thinks and how Holmes reasons. And this is always one of them where, okay, I've got all this information, What do you think happened? And someone and Huxtable's like, oh, the bicycle is a blind. And Holmes is like, well, then why wouldn't he take two? Just absolutely pulls the pin out of that idea entirely. And Huxley even says, I suppose he would. And Holmes is like, of course he would. Why? Like, this is it. So we have to, and so there's that moment of like, on to a whole new idea. Now let's talk about his correspondence.
Yeah.
Right. And he'll do this again later in the case when he himself will present a series of events to Watson. And Watson says, well, this one bit doesn't quite make sense. And he goes, well, that's exactly right, Watson. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't make sense, then obviously what I've said must not be correct.
That little exchange, we're jumping ahead. I'm sorry, Ed, but that little exchange is like top 10 exchanges in the whole canon for me. Like in terms of just really clever writing on Conan Doyle's part and also insight into Holmes's process and at the same point insight into Watson's contributions to Holmes's life. Like it's all right there in like 2 sentences.
And Holmes gives his view after this Q&A with Huxtable. Either the boy was carried off by force or he went of his own free will. Like that's the first thing I have to figure out before to mentally know for a theoretical solution to this. First thing he needs to know is to see the scene of the crime. That would be the first thing normally. You see the physical, evidence, and you can put things together from there. But here, because they've got this head, he's been behind on investigating. That's the first thing he has to figure out. And then and that leads to immediately ask about his relations with his father. His Grace is never very friendly with anyone.
He's too concerned with public matters.
Yes. And not nice. So we get another mention of Wilder here, His Grace's secretary. He's the one that let him know about this stuff. And then the letter, he's like, where is the letter? Is it still there? And he says, no, it was gone. So Holmes can't investigate the letter and find some clues in that. And then Huxtable tells him that they're being investigated. Like there's an investigation going on in Liverpool. Because what's the Liverpool connection again?
There's a man and a boy were seen boarding a train or something like that.
Yeah.
So they're out there.
Yeah. and Holmes says, let them keep investigating in Liverpool or wherever else that red herring ledger pack. So Holmes, like, I like how he sets stage for himself. Make sure you keep everybody else away so I can just go and solve it without anybody interfering with
Yeah, they've
me.
already walked all over my crime
Yeah.
scene, so
Yeah, and the
go
scent
away.
is not so cold
Right.
that the two old hounds like Watson and I like that they're friends. They're partners.
Partners. They were roommates.
History will record them as roommates. Yes.
Yes, very good friends. Um, Watson is very much taken into Holmes's confidence in this story, and what Holmes actually shares things with him and bounces ideas off of him. And we have that like really sweet moment when they'll discover the body later, and Watson's like, "Well, I can go back," and he's like, "No, you can't go back. I need you because I need to talk
You
to
need
you.
to stay.
You have to
Mhm.
stay. We have to find somebody else to go report it because you need to be here because I have to talk to you about stuff."
He gets him a cup of cocoa in the morning. So there you
Yeah,
go.
after he like wakes him up by like standing over him like my cat.
Hey, got you a cup of cocoa. If your cat got you a cup of cocoa and said, wake up, and here's a
Well,
Yeah.
nice little cup of cocoa.
to be fair, Holmes says cocoa is over there in the other room
Oh, he doesn't even
available.
bring it.
I have not brought it
I
for
had a
you.
servant bring it up for you.
Yeah.
But he did. He thought of that. He thought, let's get Watson some
There's a
cocoa.
continental breakfast in the lobby, Watson. Hurry up.
Only until 7:30. Let's go.
All righty. They head off to the Peak Country. Um, I didn't necessarily know what Peak Country is. It's that north central England, Derbyshire, Cheshire. Mr. Darcy is from there. That's where Pemberley is in Derbyshire. Um, and that's where they're headed. It's just situated for especially Americans. That's that north central part, just under Scotland in the middle. There you go. That's north central. England. And it's peak because it's a lot of hills and well, mountains, they might call them. I don't know. So um, uh, most mountains in England are hills anywhere else. So but there's some elevated places there that people will go to. Um, they arrive and the Duke's already there. The Duke and Mr. Wilder are in the study. And this I like Doyle really pulling out the all the stops here in this, description of him here. I mean, it's so he's tall and stately, scrupulously dressed, with a drawn, thin face and a nose which was grotesquely curved and long, and a long, dwindling beard of vivid red. Really, it's like respectable Fagin is what we get here, especially with the red beard. I don't know if there's something we're supposed to think about that. Um, but let's look at the Paget. Unfortunately, black and white, so you don't get the vivid red of the beard.
I'm glad you have that because I realized mine is in the other room, my
Yeah.
Paget book. But
But there we go.
We get
And
the grotesque nose. It's hard to tell.
yes, yeah, it's hard to tell on this kind of angle, but and I love any long beard picture. So like I'm always in favor of that. Please, many long beards.
Yeah,
But
his beard looks like yours, Ed.
yeah, well, no red though, obviously. Well, and yeah, and he's, I guess, still, despite the beard and the gaunt face, I imagine that he's not even so old that he's gone white and gray. He's just, kind of dignified. Or no, well, maybe he's staining it, maybe he's staining it. So I love the Wilder look here. This is such a supercilious, like kind of look on his face here. He so looks like,
Got a very punchable face.
yeah, which is the character. But we don't get that. We only get it in hearsay until we always get it in hearsay. We never really get him behaving as other people paint him. Uh, but this picture, I really think that knowing look that, yeah, you're not going to catch me, kind of look he's got here. He looks very assured of himself, but he is next to the Duke, so it's all power. He
and he
recognizes. Go ahead.
and Wilder will be the one who talks.
Yeah.
Wilder will be the one who opens the conversation, who has the conversation, and it is the Duke who will, like Jabba the Hutt and C-3PO, it is the Duke who will interject when his concierge goes wrong.
There you go. You have a Star Wars reference for everything? Is this
Potentially. We'll
just
see.
happens
We'll
that
figure
way?
it out.
Or The Simpsons.
All right.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely one of the two.
Um, the Duke is well, yeah, and it's Wilder opens the conversation, and then of course the Grace is anxious to avoid all public scandal. Mr. Sherlock Holmes can return to London by the morning train. Huxtable says, browbeaten.
Hardly that, Doctor, hardly that, said Holmes in his blandest voice. I'm going to stay, whether I have the shelter of your roof or the village inn is up to you to decide.
Yeah. This northern air is invigorating and pleasant. You're like, I'm just gonna stay up here for the air.
And occupy my mind as best I can.
Yeah, you can't stop me from being around.
Which is a real assertion to power that, you're not gonna scare me off this case. And it's unusual because it's kind it's if you don't want me to investigate, then I won't investigate is one thing you could say, but not Sherlock. Once he's and it's because and we've seen this in past stories, it's because I'm intrigued, I'm going to do this. It's got nothing to do with you, with what your problem is. It's got to do with I'm intrigued now and I'm going to go through with this. At least, that's my take on it. Like he's less concerned with justice, with helping people, and more concerned sometimes with the fact that this is something that's really exciting and that
I think also Nick and you and I have had this conversation too about like who is his client here? Like
Yes.
he's not really working. Was that what you were going to say? He's like not really
part of it, yeah.
Not really working for the Duke. The Duke isn't the one that brought him in. The Duke isn't the one that consulted with him. It's Dr. Huxtable who's asked for his help. And so that's kind of, if Holmes has any sort of allegiance or loyalty to someone in the case, it's the client, even though the client may be acting on someone else's behalf.
And there's also a moment that to me reads as a challenge to power. Because he is, like you said, he is being tried to be scared off. And Holmes is like, oh, no. I'm not going anywhere. And like, it's not even, I don't even think it's a veiled threat that he's going to keep investigating the case. I think it's just an outright statement. And he's done this to police. Whether we work together or separately is up to you. But I'm here and going to investigate it. And yeah. I love the Duke's response. I agree that you shouldn't have been involved. But now that you are involved, please work with us. Let's bring you in. This is full, all systems go.
Come stay at my house.
No, thank you, says Holmes. because even at this point, to Mary's point, who's his client? His client is Dr. Huxtable in the Priory School. So like, as you know, the Duke in the broadest schema of the world at this point is suspect as opposed to client. I don't make data without clay kind of thing, but like it is that sort of like I'm asserting my independence, but I also don't know how you're involved. Because remember, he says earlier, if he went, it's because he went with someone he knew. And I asked about the correspondence to figure out who had a Duke. You're the only person. So like, and this is the thing I love too. Like when you read these, it's like, oh, Holmes is like well ahead of where you talked about him, Watson being in his confidence, and he is. But Holmes is also still 3 steps ahead of that as he's doing all this.
And he lays right in with questions to the Duke, questions that normal and for people that might understand too, a Duke and Duchess, they are the highest ranks under aristocracy. You go from Duke and you go and then you move right to I could be on the throne. So it's that he's very powerful, and especially in a very class-driven society, people don't tend to ask direct questions, and especially personal ones, of someone of that stature. And Holmes is right in on it. I'm sorry. I know like your marriage problems, but I have to ask. And he asks about his marriage.
Well, sorry to go back. The first thing he asks is, "Do you have any idea? Have you formed an opinion on what happened?"
Interesting. Yeah, it's the second time he's done that. Yeah.
And unlike Huxtable, the Duke says no. And Holmes is like, "Great, I have some questions that I have to ask you. Because you don't have a theory I need to shoot down, now let us get to some facts here."
Um, and also I can imagine that that's also a lead in for him to maybe get some information that he hasn't possibly gotten yet. But neither of them are giving anything away. Huxtable doesn't know anything else, and the Duke's not going to tell him anything unless he's directly asked. But he asked about the marriage, do you think? And then there's been no demand for a ransom. And then he asks about the letter. And I like this, that you wrote to your son the day before. Did he receive it on that day? Yes. Um, Anything in the letter? No. And then did you post that letter yourself? And then now, of course, Wilder posted it because he's secretary. And I wonder if Holmes hasn't pretty much solved this at this point. Now, he still doesn't know what's happened to like Heidegger and certain people, but I wonder if already this is the kind of thing that you can look back to after you know the solution. And Holmes is like, Wilder's involved. Wilder had the letter that is now missing, that is the last letter that the son gotten, and that Holmes is now he'll still need to, and as he usually does, I know I still need to go and investigate and find, the proof of these things, but I wonder if this isn't already in his mind the working theory that I'm Wilder's got something to do with this.
He said as much earlier, that for whatever reason the boy left is driven by that correspondence.
Yeah.
So something is involved here. And now he knows that two people touched it.
Yeah. And Wilder was the last. So one of them's lying. So they Holmes wants to ask more questions, but it's like, the nobleman's abrupt manner showed that the interview was at end. And I'm sure that that's a thing that he frequently does. He's learned that skill to end something by walking away, as I think the abrupt manner probably.
But contrast this to Holmes's interaction with other important people, where he Lieutenant Columbo's them a little bit more. He might be more irritated that he couldn't ask questions. He might be a little bit like, you're not taking this seriously enough, sir. Like, there's something in this interaction Holmes has with the Duke that Holmes recognizes. And I think this is key to understanding the end, because there's something in this scene where Holmes and the Duke kind of vibe in a way that Holmes does not vibe with typically with dukes and royalty.
Absolutely.
And the aristocracy.
Absolutely. I wonder if part of that is the fact that the Duke is so forthcoming in answering his questions.
Hmm.
Even when Holmes says, like, I'm sorry I have to ask, but I have to ask about your marriage situation. There's none of this posturing. There's none of this indignance. Like, how dare you, sir? Like, I assure you, she has nothing to do with it, or like, there's no posture. There's no attempt to shield him. He answers all the questions that are put to him and then kind of closes down the interview.
And there's even a moment when Watson is like, I could tell the Duke is uncomfortable by answering these questions, but he is answering them in a forthright manner. And that goes back to the like, well, if he's involved, half confidences are crazy in such a case. If he's involved, he's involved. I will tell you everything, Mr. Holmes. Do you have, and it goes back to the thing earlier. Do you have any ideas? No. Okay, this is a guy who's on my wavelength, Holmes, to some extent. Because it's not, oh, it's probably the damn gypsy. It's not anything blaming his wife. He actually, does he not think his wife's involved? But he still says,
yeah,
I don't think she's involved, but you should still look in France.
Yeah.
So like, even that kind of answer is, I'm not going to throw her under the bus. I'm not going to bring politics into it. Yeah. There's something in this conversation that is different than Holmes and normal aristocracy.
Holmes now gets to investigate the scene for what it's still going to. It yielded nothing, it searches his chamber. It's at night now. He checks the ivy, um, and also Heidegger leaving. He leaves the house alone, leaves Watson alone. This is Holmes I need to go and look at things. And this is always it. His first look at a scene. He doesn't want anybody, even Watson, involved. He needs to look at everything and examine things. He returns after 11 with a large ordnance map of the neighborhood. Um, Spreads it out, began to smoke over it. We get the reeking amber of his pipe.
Over Watson's bed, mind you. This is
Yes.
Watson's room. He
Oh, that's
comes
right. He laid it on the bed too.
the
Yeah.
map on Watson's bed and starts smoking over Watson's bed. Like,
Need a pipe,
in your own
I'm
bed,
done.
buddy.
There's no like table
were
we could have done this on.
Were you going to, or were you going to go
The
to bed?
floor is better. Yeah.
No.
We do get this fun little diagram, though.
Yes, and let me share that because we don't get the ordnance map. Instead, we get this drawn map, which I guess what we would have to say is Watson, as he's then writing the story, has to draw the map himself from, to provide it for the publication. And here it is. And there's also a spoiler in it if people are reading for the first time. Heidegger's body right here.
Oh no.
So like it is all later. Like the map is here, and then actually, and the map doesn't happen a little bit. The map doesn't occur. You don't see the map until they're actually out on the walk, right?
Oh yeah, looking at the text around that map,
Yeah.
it is
So you see
it
the
is a
map
little bit later.
It's not like
It's still a spoiler, but it
you're
is.
seeing this map now, but yeah.
I also this is not in my edition, but at the bottom of this map, it's John H. Watson. Like he has
Oh, it
signed
is.
the
So he
map.
signed it. Yeah. So there you go. That's what
That
it
is
says.
not in my
Oh, that's so cute.
like
I
it
had
is my illustration is very
Yeah.
similar, but without that little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's so this is it in the Strand. And let me look at the let's look at the Colliers. Did they have that by John H. Watson in the bottom? They did not, and that's why yours doesn't, because the map that was pulled, and you can look at the maps. If you have it, like they're slightly different. They're a little bit different in them and the way they're constructed.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
But in both of them, he has drawn Holderness Hall.
With
Like
the little flag on the
with a
turret.
little
Little
flag on
flag.
it. Yeah.
Little flag waving.
It's very cute.
Yep. Here's the fighting. I love a map in a story. Every story should have a map.
Obviously, like this is like super. I don't know what the point of making this observation is, but this is clearly after the fact because
Yeah.
he has the body in there. He has the fighting cock. He has Holderness Hall, which he hasn't been to yet.
Yeah.
So this is clearly for publication,
Yes.
as you were saying, as opposed to the map they get at the time.
Yeah.
Can I talk for a second about how much I love this moment, this map?
Go ahead.
Because just as a narrative tool, because we don't know what happened to these guys. They left the school and Conan Doyle, to a high degree of sure, how about that? Says that it has to be to the north. We have with sort of like hand-waving explanation. They didn't go west, they didn't go east, they didn't go south. There's only one direction this mystery goes, Watson, north. Because Conan Doyle is not interested in writing west, east, and south adventures for them to have and then not go. And he's not interested in we've mentioned red herrings earlier, but I love how the Sherlock Holmes stories by and large do not have any. Like there are no red herrings in the sense of what comes later in detective fiction, where we're going to spend 80 pages trying to figure out if that's the maid. Oh, it's not the maid. And in this story, these are the red herrings. It's like, oh, could it be to the west? Absolutely not. Well, what about the east? No, there was a constable on duty on a road where nothing happens all night at the intersection where he would know that, like, that is incredible, sort of like, whatever, guy was there.
How
Next.
about
That's a
everybody being awake in the hotel
Yeah.
and looking
yeah.
out the windows?
And these are like just believable enough
Well,
to keep us moving to the next
yeah,
paragraph.
the inn is believable enough, and that they're waiting
Yeah.
for a doctor, and that makes sense that people would be on the lookout for him. The constable, that's a punishment assignment. That constable was drunk at some time and got caught, and they were like, "All right, you're on the road all night long."
But
That's fine
then,
there.
yes, but then Holmes has a moment like, I went to see him and he's trustworthy. So, not that way. Where is the adventure? It's very Dungeons and Dragons. Where is the adventure, Watson?
Roll. Nope, you can't go
Where's
that
the
way.
adventure? It's to the north. Okay, let's go to the north. That's where the DM has prepped. Let's
Yep.
go that way.
DMs hate it when you're trying to go another way. They're like, "Oh, no, you don't find anything out there. Turn
Yeah.
go."
No, that road doesn't exist for after 60 feet. It just
You
road.
suddenly hear a sound coming from the north.
There was an inn, and everyone in the inn tells you that no one passed this road. For sure. No one passed this. So, cool. Moving on. We're going north, Watson. We're going into the moor.
They Holmes goes over the ordnance map at least with him, and tells him all this information we were just talking about. And then there's a knock on the door, and Huxtable comes in, and he's got the blue cricket cap with the white chevron on the peak. At last, we have a clue. I have that clue because in Ross Davies' wonderful Baker Street Almanac, he included these cardboard caps with
I love
the blue
that.
cap with the chevron.
Amazing.
So there you go. Um, and you know what's awesome is that he put two in every one, knowing full well we want to wear them, but we would love to just save one. And
Frosted.
so there you
He
go.
knows. He knows.
So this clue
Sorry,
is
did they
the
find this clue after one of my favorite parts of this, which is Watson's obsession with what has
But
happened to the
but the bicycle, I
bicycle.
I
Yes,
persisted.
I'm getting to the bicycle.
There
Okay,
you
but
go.
the bicycle? Yes. Okay, well, fine. The bicycle. I just think it's so fun. Like a dog with his teeth in, like, but where is the bicycle? And Holmes is like, I don't know, the bicycle. We'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
I love that little detail and that little like frustration of Watson not being able to let the bicycle go because it is important, but
And
it's
Doyle can't let the bicycle go either. So he's loving bicycles at this point. People go back and look at the solitary cyclist episode we just posted. There's pictures you find. Like, I don't know. There's like a dozen pictures of Doyle standing next to her on a bicycle. Like he bought into that bicycle craze that happened
Yes, he did.
in the 1890s and was all over it and riding a bike and making his wife ride the bike. And
these are two stories in a row that are full of bicycles.
yeah. Um,
But he blames once they find the clue, they say it was because of the pack of gypsies, right?
yes, of
Which
course.
is one of our favorite red herrings.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, it was the gypsy camp, and that's where the cap was. Of course, it's always the gypsies, and
It's always the gypsies, and it's never the gypsies.
Holmes is like, it's never the gypsies.
Right.
Well, and that's why I would never use the word red herring to describe this. Because they come in as like, they found the police, they will give up the thing, whether it's by the Duke's purse or the strength of the law, and he leaves. And Holmes is like, no way. Absolutely not. But
No
we
effing
know
way, Watson.
now we know we need to go north because they found the cap. And the police have really done nothing except the gypsies. Fine, we don't need them. Let's keep going, Watson. And that's why I would never describe it as a red herring. Because Holmes is never herring
He
down.
never falls for a red
Never.
herring.
That's true. It's the same thing with Speckled Band.
Yeah.
They had the band of gypsies, and he's like, that's not it.
That's not it. No, what else you got? Exactly. Like the stories, the whole canon very strongly does not have that kind of like, what about this, Mr. Holmes? Like he very rarely follows the wrong track of evidence. Partly because they're short stories. He can't. There's not enough pages.
But there was a hat. Like they had his hat. Now, like it's of course Holmes is like it's not them, but any normal person would think like they have his hat. That is such an incriminating piece of evidence.
But
That,
but this is where I love learning about Holmes's thinking, because if you as soon as you have a theory, you begin twisting facts to fit theories
Yeah.
instead of theories to fit facts.
Yeah.
And like this is a perfect story that shows that off. We found his hat, therefore they need to be involved. It's like, no, that's not necessarily true. And he will say this later when they're on the moor. We have to separate what we know from what is essential and what is incidental. What information does the stuff we know actually give us? And how do we think this through? This is leading up to the part
yeah.
we were
get to
alluding
that.
to earlier.
And that quote is a great one, and we would definitely get to that one when it happens too. First, I finished my nut brown there. Now
Hey.
I'm on to the Tatty Porter from Samuel Smith, and they're up. Are they in the north up there? This brewery, I think it might be.
One thing I'll say about the gypsies, which I appreciate, is for all the sort of racial troubles these stories have, and their old tiny racism, it never is the gypsies, and Holmes never thinks it is. Holmes, who is our, and Watson, who is our voice and our eyes, is never taken in and never suggests that this could be the case. That this, for all intents and purposes, is just a group of people who are minding their business, and they don't get dragged into either of these cases.
Yes, I think so too. Speckled Band's the other big one that they show up in, and
yeah, because of the band connection.
yeah. And is there another and there's a band of them in the area too. I wonder if there's another one. I don't know. Anyway, the day was just breaking when I woke to find a long, thin form of Holmes by my bedside, like your cat, staring you in the face. He was fully dressed and apparently already been out. There's cocoa ready in the next room. Get a move on. And they head out, and then we get this great image of Sherlock on the hunt. His eyes shone and his cheek was flushed with the exhilaration of the master workman who sees his work lies ready before him. A very different Holmes, this active, alert man from the introspective and pallid dreamer of Baker Street. I felt as I looked upon that supple figure, alive with nervous energy, that it was indeed a strenuous day that awaited us. Watson is so in love with Sherlock.
Yeah, what a pulsingly heterosexual way to talk
Ooh.
about your friend.
Your friend, totally.
But the good news is there is a bicycle
figure. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
I also love like there's so much Holmes as artist imagery, but this is Holmes as workman,
Yeah.
who is ready to go do his job.
Workman. Yeah, yeah. I'll look that up in the text. I can't imagine that's been used to describe him before as a workman, as like a a by his hands craft person.
Somebody praises the workman-like job he does on something.
Yeah.
Isn't that there's that reference, but I can't remember can't remember the actual reference.
The first they check number one, said Holmes, looking over the moor. They can't find anything at first, just a lot of sheep marks, which I don't know if sheep marks is a euphemism for sheep dung.
I was wondering, but I think maybe it is actually like
it's just hoofs, and the cows had left their tracks. But then
a bicycle.
And then, yes, they're clearly marked on the sodden soil, the track of a bicycle.
Hurrah! I cried. We have it. But Holmes was shaking his head.
Yeah.
A bicycle, but not the bicycle.
The bicycle. I am familiar with 42 different impressions left by tires. This, as you perceive, is a Dunlop with a patch upon the outer cover. Heidegger's were Palmer's, leaving longitudinal stripes, all this. But what's interesting is I learned this in the and the less Klinger annotated. Um, you know how you tell a Dunlop tire? It says Dunlop. They had Dunlop all around there in words. So it's like, oh, that must be a Dunlop tire. Oh, really? Wait, so you can read?
It's like
That,
getting the name of the innkeeper.
yeah.
How do you know
Well,
my name?
to be fair, Holmes says this, as you perceive,
There
is a
you go.
Dunlop. So he knows Watson is
Well,
just
there you
reading.
go. Maybe that's
He
it. Yeah,
knows
maybe he's
Watson
acknowledging that.
is reading the word. Yeah,
But the Palmers have longitudinal stripes,
which he
not their name.
explains how he knows that exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they're real tire manufacturers too. For people you might not think, yeah, he didn't invent those. They're real tire manufacturers. Um, and now he's while Watson's Holmes like they were going this direction. That's how they were made. Or Watson's like we're towards it. No. The more deeply sunk the impression is, of course, the hind wheel upon which the weight rests. So they give a different impression depending on the direction that you're going. People
sure.
have said that's not true. And Doyle himself, in Memories and Adventures, wrote, there are some questions concerned with particular stories which turn up periodically from every quarter of the globe. In The Adventure of the Priory School, Holmes remarks in his offhand way that by looking at a bicycle track on a damp moor, one can say which way it was heading. I had so many remonstrances upon this point, and people varying from pity to anger. Like people were writing at the time, like,
Bicycle people are
idiots,
all
that can't happen.
Yeah, you
Uh,
pissed
that
off the wrong fandom, Doyle.
that
the
that I
cyclists are at it.
he says I took out my bicycle and tried. I had imagined that the observations of the way in which the track of the hind wheel overlaid the track of the front one when the machine was not running dead straight would show the direction. I found that my correspondents were right and I was wrong. For this would be the same whichever way the bicycle was moving. On the other hand,
And sorry to interrupt your quote. This, I think, is the most important part Doyle's um, of Doyle's response, and it is, I think, so characteristic of the way Holmes explains his deductions and Watson records the explanation of Holmes's deductions. So, Ed, please continue.
you have it there?
I do.
Read it. On the other hand.
On the other hand, the real solution was much simpler. For on an undulating moor, the wheels make a much deeper impression uphill and a more shallow one downhill. So Holmes was justified of his wisdom after all. And if we are to play the game that this really happened and Watson is writing a story that he wants people to read and like, remember, Holmes's big critique is, your stories are not scientific enough, Dr. Watson. Watson has to give simple explanations of complicated things to the audience so they can go, oh, of course, the overlapping tires. Meanwhile, Holmes is boring Watson out on the moor with a long history, a long explanation of the 6 or 7 reasons he knows which direction the tire is going. And Holmes and Watson is then just like, he's writing all 7, crosses them all out, and says, tires. And that's it. That's all he writes in the story.
He reversed his boots.
Right. Well, but this to me is so canonical and also evolutionary because early on in the Mary Sutherland story, Case of Identity, he knows they're the same typewriter because of the P's and the Q's, and there are 7 other indicators that
Yeah.
show this to me. And Watson just starts dropping out that part of sentences, and Holmes seems more like a wizard because you're like, not only that, Watson has a vested interest in these stories being popular. He has a vested interest in Holmes the brand. So Holmes has to feel otherworldly intelligent.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Glad. Love it.
I had forgot well one thing I always like to mention too is the illustration. Let's get to it here when they discover the bike tracks. They're in the countryside, so of course Paget draws him. Doyle doesn't do this. What? Like Doyle doesn't. He hadn't caught on by this point. When Holmes is out in the countryside, he needs to be wearing the hat. Paget always puts the hat. Well, doesn't always, but very frequently puts the hat on him. There's the deer stalker. You can see it better in this one here when they find the body. So
This was one of the funnier
deer
things
stalker,
that
baby.
the BBC got, I thought, funny and right, was when Sherlock had to buy into the brand of
Yeah,
wearing the hat. People love the hat,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Paget sees that Holmes is in the countryside. He's got to have the hat. Doyle is slow to adopt.
Yes.
Well, it's about iconography, right?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
And
one
it's
of the
become it. At this point, it's become it with Gillette and the play.
yeah, and because one of them one of them has a nose for it, one of them has an eye for it, and the other one is like you can't make you can't make language iconic in the same way as you can an image. So of course Paget's going to do it every time.
Yep. Deerstalker story, even though it doesn't say it in the story,
Oh, he's in the country.
because zero of the stories say deerstalker. So, but this is a deerstalker story. All righty. Now they have to stop her again because the mark of the bicycle was was nearly obliterated by the hoofs of cows, which we don't recognize as important now. We won't learn that until later. Um, they're not the hooves of cows. And Holmes has to sit down and think, and Watson smoked 2 cigarettes before he moved. This is only the second time we actually see Watson smoking cigarettes, and I forgot to write down the first time, or the
The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Hound of the Baskervilles. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Watson doesn't usually smoke cigarettes. Well, it doesn't usually mention that he's smoking cigarettes, of course. So I'm certain he's smoking cigarettes all the time. But Holmes is momentarily baffled here, and even mentions that it's possible that a cunning man might change the tire of his bicycle in order to leave unfamiliar tracks, which is actually what happens with the hooves, not the bicycle tracks. A criminal who is capable of such a thought is a man whom I should be proud to do business with.
Which is such a funny way of saying that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and so Holmes is really hooked now. This is the case that I want. Like there's really something interesting going on here. Um, and then shortly after, he gives a cry of delight because they found the Palmer type track. And
I congratulate you.
yes. And now they go and they follow that, and of course they find blood.
Which is also a great response. Bad, bad, Watson. This is bad.
And then Watson finally finds the bicycle.
Yes.
Finally.
And then the bicycle, Palmer tired, one pedal bent, the whole front of it horribly smeared and slobbered with blood. That's a weird word to use right there, because nobody was slobbering blood onto it. It was, smeared and slobbered with blood.
Anthropomorphizing the Moors.
Yeah. So, and there's the body. We saw the picture. The cause of his death was a frightful blow upon the head, which had crushed in part of his skull. So really, really hit hard and murdered. Luckily, someone is there to go for the police. I love this detail in this story that, Doyle's writing. He realizes like, oh, they can't just leave him. Oh, there's that peasant, and he calls him a peasant.
Yeah, go get that peasant. Yeah.
Right over there. Well, first he's called like
Fellow.
what's
Oh,
yeah,
a
a fellow.
fellow. Go get that fellow. I brought the
Yeah.
peasant over.
Yes. Um, Watson calls him a peasant.
So good. I love the sass level in this story, and it'll come back again later, but like this sass of Watson being like, could he have fractured his skull in a fall? And Holmes is like in a morass, Watson.
Yeah, yeah, come on.
Like there's a lot of those kinds of little moments where it's like, really? Which of course about the sprained ankle is like one of my favorite one of my favorite bits in the Sherlock Holmes story, but we'll get there.
And it's right before then, this is that line. Before we start to investigate that, let us try to realize what we do know so as to make the most of it and to separate the essential from the accidental. It was something you hinted at earlier, Nick, that that's not usually in one of the list of Holmes sayings, to separate the essential from the accidental, and it belongs there. That's a key way that Holmes investigates.
This is another one of those moments. Mary talked before about bringing Watson into his confidence. And because Watson is in his confidence, Holmes is working through his ideas in a very present, sort of like get it all up on the whiteboard kind of way. Here's what we know for sure. And if we know those things for sure, we can start to make guesses about what must have been true in order for them to happen. Okay, now let's check through, and he says at the end, he says towards the bit of this, let us continue our reconstruction, because Mary has heard me say this 100 times. Holmes's greatest complaint about the police is that they have no imagination, and his own greatest benefit is that he does. He imagines what the criminal could do. He imagines what everyone involved does, and then tracks through and finds out where the facts intersect. And if the facts don't intersect, he must have done something else. So let's sort of try to put ourselves in those places. So he is reconstructing this case and the only possible flow of events based on the ones we know. He's filling in all the holes and deducing what must be there.
And we get to watch the whole thing.
Yes.
Holmes describing this. I mean, it makes it so vivid for the reader to see how he's solving a crime and how he's thinking about the crime and solving it and investigating it. And I think it's also setting up the kind of mystery genre as it then develops, that to follow along, to look for the clues, to this is how to put this thing together, and which will also kind of lead to that feeling, if you don't get this, you feel cheated in one of these stories, like, oh, I didn't know that, so of course how could you don't like information left out as a reader if it's a mystery.
And this is where it ties into red herrings. Like, there are no suspects in this story the way there are in an Agatha Christie novel, where which one of this cast of characters is the killer? Well, we can point some things here, we can point some things there. This one, you watch Holmes go through the process far more in the Sherlock Holmes canon. You watch him sort of like think through how to solve a mystery, as opposed to looking for clues to point one way or the other. It's just methodically working through the facts.
Which he does. And to do that, and then he does, but then we still don't. He explains everything up to then, and he's figured this out, I think, and he's putting together the pieces now that will explain everything and give him the final details.
Well,
but he's still not sharing it.
He's got to be dramatic first.
Well, he gets to this brilliant moment. This is what happened. The lad had a companion. We survey the ground, and what do we find? A cattle marks. There's no path within 50 yards. Another cyclist could have had nothing to do with this murder, nor are there any human footmarks. Holmes, I cried, this is impossible. Admirable, he said, a most illuminating remark. It is impossible as I state it, and therefore I must, in some respect, have stated it wrong.
Yeah.
And then he goes, okay, Watson, what do you think? Where did I go wrong? What you saw for yourself, can you suggest any fallacy? And that's Mary, where he gets that, well, what if he fractured his skull? Like, no. They're like, real. Think, Watson, think. But that whole process of like Like that is it. That is it for me. The one we mentioned earlier. It's impossible. You're right. It's impossible as I've stated it. Therefore, I stated it wrong.
Right. The facts
So
have to be the facts. We are not going to contort the facts to fit our theories. We're going to state the theory as it is. And if there's a flaw in it, it's a flaw with the theory because the facts are the facts.
And so we don't know what we're doing. Let's pull all of that conclusions back, and we have solved some worse problems. Come, having exhausted the Palmer, let's see what the Dunlop can do. Let's go find more information so we can state it correctly.
It also gives us another like Watson looking stupid moment. Now he's not stupid, and we know that because reading all the stories and you recognize, but it's just another thing that like I'm at my wit's end, and there are because that those kinds of lines frequently happen, it leads then to the supposition that Watson must be the dim bulb, and he's not the dim bulb.
Because no one reads the next line. Because Watson says, I am at my wit's end, and Holmes says, tut tut, we have solved some worse problems. It's very encouraging. It's very sort of like, no, 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 man. Like this is not, no, you're not, man. We've been in worse. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, and it's the we, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing we're doing together.
Mhm.
I
have to be dramatic. Holmes has to be dramatic.
Well, now they come across the forbidding and squalid inn. It's the Fighting Cock. We know that because it was on the map as the Fighting Cock. And they and then suddenly, as they're approaching, Holmes gave a sudden groan and clutched me by the shoulder to save himself from falling. He had had one of those violent strains of the ankle which leave a man helpless. Does Watson really think that he's actually injured? It seems like he writes it as if he does. Maybe that's just for our benefit, but clearly Holmes is faking it, and I think the reader recognizes that he's faking it right away.
I think Watson does too, because a page later he says, it was astonishing how rapidly that sprained ankle recovered.
So good.
Yeah. As opposed to any other story where Watson's like really lampshading what Holmes is doing, he just sort of like lets the reader draw his own conclusion because now Watson's in on the joke. He's seen it. Good.
This is also different from when Watson is actually concerned and taken in when Holmes fakes illness and Watson's like concerned. Like, is it Orange Pips? Which one is Silver Blaze where he knocks the thing over and then
Reigate Squires.
Reigate Squires.
Yeah.
Blames Watson for it, and Watson's like, I didn't, and I couldn't understand why he was blaming me. Like I like got quiet, like what was his deal?
And that story also, and he was like feeling ill, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, you okay? Let's get him in here." So yeah. All right. Well, they come.
My favorite bit about when they meet the innkeeper.
The innkeeper here, the squat, dark, elderly man smoking a black clay pipe. Do I have a clay? Yeah, this clay is getting fairly blackened, but it's only blackening kind of up the top. I can't really get it to blacken down on the stem as much. It's just not working. But they will blacken over time. And as I mentioned before, that what they get a little gross. Because all the oils wind up staying in there, and as you smoke it, you can taste that. It's bitter. Clearly this kind of smoker doesn't care. He's not like me with these like nice pipes and tobaccos. He doesn't care what he's smoking. But they could clean these as well. And you just put it in your fireplace, and that heat will turn it back white again. All the oils will come right out of it. So.
I've learned so much about pipes from these shows.
There you go. So that's what I'm here for. So if I have nothing else to offer, I'm so committed to smoking.
Pipes 101.
That's such a great insight into Reuben Hayes, though.
Yeah.
The idea
he doesn't care. Yep.
He's smoking this pipe and could clean it. He has a smithy, like this is something he could take care of and doesn't.
Mary, I was at the Barnes a few weeks ago, the Barnes Foundation, and those great impressionist paintings, and with someone who works there, and I mentioned something about pipes in this one painting, and I made some kind of observation about it, what that kind of said about the painting, and they were like, "Wow, like what? Like we never thought of that." I was like, you like, I'm not like an ex, like I'm like,
You were Sherlock
I
Holmes
don't think I
tonight.
have nothing to offer impressionist painting,
No, but you
critique.
do.
But
But you do.
apparently that I did because
It's all those details.
I smoke.
My favorite thing with paintings is to look at the way that fruit is represented in still life and to see the way that our produce has changed over hundreds of years and the way that we've selectively bred things. Like if you see watermelons from like the 16 and 1700s, they just are completely like foreign looking. They're not pink on the inside. They're just like swirls. So yeah, I mean, looking at these details, it maybe because we're Sherlockians. It's like
Yeah.
we notice things that people don't notice, and there's actually things that you can glean from this information. Something about a person's pipe may actually tell you something about their character.
I just think it's because I smoke a lot and I obsess over it. So there you go. But that's Sherlockian to obsess over something,
It
right?
is.
Also true. Also true.
Trifles.
Um, Reuben Hayes also has a suspicious flash, also has a pair of cunning eyes, which, Holmes notices right away. And then there's this great
Oh,
exchange.
it's amazing. Well, first he's like, gives him the look, how do you know my name? It's like, well, it's printed on the sign above the door that you're standing under. But also, can I come in? I suppose you haven't, I suppose you haven't such a thing as a carriage in your stables? No, I have not. I can hardly put my foot to the ground. Don't put it to the ground. But I can't walk. Then hop. Like, emit same energy as then perish. But like, it's so.
Look here, my man. This really is rather awkward. I don't mind how I get on. Neither do I.
Neither do I. Does not give a. He does not care.
Yeah. This is the innkeeper who's not doing a lot of trade, let me tell you. He doesn't care about his customers one bit.
Because where else are you gonna stay? You're out on the moors.
Yeah.
This is the only place you can stay. He doesn't have to be nice to you for your business.
Nope. Well, Holmes isn't a regular either, and he could tell you're a stranger, so I distrust you. I'm not going to talk to you. And clearly, I've just murdered someone, so anybody poking their nose around here, I'm going to be really suspicious about. Um, and then, and then it's pals of the Duke, I suppose, and we get Doyle spelling Duke Dook,
Got to
which
get that
is
dialect.
it is, but it's not really like Duke Duke and Duke Dook are I don't know if there you can really make a distinction in how that sounds, but
Not if
clearly
you're
it's
breathing it, hearing it, but if you're seeing it, you are
yeah.
automatically doing it.
That's exactly
Yep.
it. It is a visual dialect
It's
and
a
like,
class
ooh.
signifier. It's like this guy is not only of a certain class that he would say it this way, but he also is contemptuous of
It's yeah.
of the actual. He's not respectful of somebody with that kind of title. And he tells us why he actually has, a grudge against him. Well, he also, I'm sorry, because he has ironical eyes when he says that. That's a really strange adjective, ironical. I can't recall seeing that anywhere else. But it's I guess it goes in with this, satirical, stance that he's taking with Holmes. And then when Holmes says, bring him news of his lost son, and he gives a start, this guy gives everything away. So this is like the worst criminal. Everything that happened, like, oh, I'm fine.
Oh,
He's
glad the kid's okay. I guess you can come in now.
He's in Liverpool. Yeah.
yeah. Again, a swift change fast over the heavy, unseen face, unshaven face. Yeah, yeah. He should have said he should have wiped his head. Um, but then he says that now he was treated badly by him. He was the head coachman, and he got sacked because of the word of a lying corn chandler who was almost certainly telling the truth about him. But he's got a grudge. And Holmes then says, you got a bicycle? I don't have a bicycle. Well, how about for a sovereign? I still
I
don't have
don't
a
have a bicycle.
bicycle.
Well, we'll see. I love that Holmes, it doesn't take him at that. Then he's like, well, you know what? We'll have some
We'll
food.
talk
And
about
we'll
that later.
talk about whether or not you have a bicycle later.
And then let's go eat. It was nearly nightfall. And then because they hadn't eaten since morning, we spent some time over our meal. Like, you're in the middle of an investigation, okay? And taking time to eat.
Well, Watson's focus on comfort and food is very consistent.
but Holmes is thinking the whole time. Watson
Mhm.
is like all about like we really took our time to eat this meal. Holmes has to piece everything together.
Well, and I mean, and Holmes doesn't eat when he's on a case and really doesn't know what's going on. So this is
Yep.
also a cue to us that like he knows where this is headed.
He's
He's
probably
not,
not eating. Yeah.
yeah,
When Watson
yeah.
says we had eaten nothing, he
We
means I had eaten nothing.
get those delightful breadcrumbs though, which is so fun, and the little like typographical diagram that we
Yep.
get. Like, did you notice how the hooves were like this and not like this and not like this?
Yep.
And he does it with the breadcrumbs, and it's rendered in typeset. I think is so funny.
By heaven, Watson, I've got it. He's figured out the cow tracks and why they're not cow tracks. They must have been horse tracks because then he shows him in the breadcrumbs. Yeah, that's really unusual. And it's it's just by chance you can do that with already established, typographical marks that he didn't have to draw. Like otherwise they would have drawn something out um
But
for it.
it's so funny because they are setting type, I imagine, when they're doing this
They
still.
are, and they get to do that, and it's early. It's almost like what do you call them? They're not. Are they? Were they emojis first when you do the punctuation
Oh,
to make a face?
emoticons.
Emoticons,
Emoticon.
emoticons, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. It's using punctuation to make a shape of something.
There's my millennial
Here,
knowledge coming in clutch.
here, here. It's hoof marks, but still, like he'll show that and then shows Watson, and what's your conclusion?
Only it
Watson's
is a
like,
remarkable cow which walks, canters, and gallops.
Well,
There's
and this
sass.
the SAS, but this is also, you made the point earlier, Mary, about Holmes taking Watson into his confidence. Now, when he solves the case, he shuts Watson out again because he doesn't explain this. He will do all of the investigating at Reuben Hayes's without telling Watson what he sees. Like it, Watson is very helpful through the process, but once Holmes knows, the walls go back up. I'm going to keep my secrets again, Watson. I'm not going to tell you what I saw through the window.
Do we think that's pride, or do we think that is that part of Holmes's showmanship, or is Holmes afraid that Watson, being the open book that he is going to tip their hand by giving something away?
Uh, it's an interesting question. I think it's split. It's got to split the difference, right? Like it's got to
Right?
be both because he says openly, "You can't lie, Watson, so I can't tell you things that you would need to lie about." But on the other hand, Watson does dissemble to some degree. Like he
Yeah.
does successfully do that.
And we do
Um,
know that Holmes will tell him sometimes, like, oh, yeah, I've solved it, and then not say
yeah.
anything. And Watson
yeah.
knows better than to bug him about it because he's got to do his like dramatic reveal of serving up like treatises in the breakfast dish or whatever.
And also frequently, like he's figured it out, but he still hasn't gone out and looked at the shoes yet, in a sense. So like he always has to finally piece these things together, and he still doesn't know that Wilder is the Duke's son. Like, like I can imagine there's something bugging him about how is Wilder involved in this, and what is that connection? And Holmes never explains, I don't think, until he finally has all of the pieces. And as a matter of fact, well, as we'll see at the end of this one, he has to get the Duke to tell him, like, you need to tell me everything because, to hear it because he doesn't have all of the pieces. So there's also that Holmes doesn't like to reveal anything. Now, of course, it's different in that naval treaty when he does. He creates a theatrical moment at the end. Um, but usually he won't explain everything until he's finally got it all.
it's also we can't escape the idea. Mary has heard me say this 100 times too. Watson is writing these stories for publication. Giving the answer now is a terrible story structure. So even if in quote unquote the real history, Holmes does tell Watson right now at dinner, Watson can't put that in the story. So
There
Watson,
is
as a creative writer, is keeping himself out of the loop so that a mystery story can have the big reveal.
I can't think of what it is. There are a couple ones that this happens, but the reason he can do it is there's still some kind of chase or exciting conclusion that can still happen, and you can't, and then it would interfere with the revelation. So he does let some, a couple times he reveals it, and then then now we have to go catch this person or do something like that. I can't recall, but I know it's happened a couple times. So, but I will look that up at another time. Old shoes. He discovers they look at the horses here. Old shoes, but newly shod. Old shoes and new nails. And then he says, "This case deserves to be a classic."
Doyle
Turn it up.
up his cases. This
A
one's a classic
case. There you go. Classic case. Reuben Hayes chases them out. And
Holmes has another great, like, as the kids say, right? Like, when we were warm, as the children say, at
Yes.
that inn. It seems to grow colder every step that I take away from it. And I just laughed because, like, that's what anytime I say something slangy, I'm like, as the kids say.
as the kids say.
The OG, as the kids say.
And I just remember playing that hot and cold. You're getting cold, getting cold, getting cold. How many times I play this with my kids? I can't recall ever playing it as a child myself. Like I can only recall doing it with my children. Is that what it is? Is only adults do it with children, but I don't know if children do it themselves. I'm not sure.
Because you have to have knowledge of something and the patience to watch somebody fumble around. And I feel like kids are not patient enough. They just blurt it out.
They don't have patience or knowledge.
Right. This is true.
Sorry, I've offended all the kids watching. Sorry.
And Watson, he's right here.
Well, Reuben Hayes knows all about it. He says, "A more self-evident villain I never saw."
That's Watson who says that. And Holmes is like, "Oh, he impressed you in that way, did he?"
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, you noticed. Okay, good."
He's like actively twirling the ends of his mustache. And Watson's like, "That guy's a villain." And Holmes is like, "Oh, we know.
Think.
Good job.
Good job."
They leave, but they don't go far. They kind of turn off the road, and then they see the cyclist coming along swiftly, and it's Wilder rides by on his bicycle. I'll share that one because it's a funny expression on his face.
A pale, agitated face, a face with horror in every lineament.
There it is.
Mouth open, the eyes staring wildly.
Oh, God.
It is. Doesn't even notice them crouched down here behind the rocks.
Very suspicious looking.
Yes, he's very upset, and to his credit, he's as we learn that as soon as he hears there's a murder, he's upset the whole time. Like I have no problem kidnapping him, but somebody got killed. Now he's really upset about this. So, he's not he's not the formidable villain that Holmes was hoping for. Although he did one thing that makes him interesting, but it's the dapper James Wilder rides by, and then they go and they look at the house, and he stops there, leaves his bike. They see somebody leaves in a dog cart, and what in the world is Mr. James Wilder doing in that den at this hour of night? He goes and he checks the bike tire, which was actually the first illustration that leads off this story. This story opens with this story of him checking the bike tire, which is really the most undramatic illustration of the story you could have used to capture everybody's attention. It's important, but it's, and I wonder, because Doyle had been annoyed with, in one of the Brigadier Gerard stories, they'd put a picture in the beginning and it was Napoleon dead, and then you read the story and he's like, that's supposed to happen later. You're not supposed to know that yet. And for clearly the final problem. They show death of Sherlock Holmes in the beginning, and a couple other stories. A solitary cyclist in the last issue. They show like the wedding scene at the end with like the shooting and her like and that's not the picture you show before the start of a story. But maybe that's because of that they've learned their lesson and we're not giving the story away. I don't know. I'll see the stories as we go along. As because they do this now for every story, the Strand does. They have an illustration before the story begins. But this is the one where he checks the tires. It's the Dunlop tire, the patched Dunlop tire. Any Dunlop tire could be you. Anybody could have a Dunlop tire. This one's patched though, so at a certain place, so that's what identifies it. Um, and then he has to take a peek closer. Who is the companion who comes to meet him there? Someone else has come too. So, and he has to go and look. We find out later it's the Duke. The But Holmes peeps in the window and then doesn't tell Watson what he saw. This is a situation where he clearly could have sold like, oh, the Duke is in there. Watson be like,
especially
what?
since he's using it as a step stool at this point.
Yes.
Still,
Hops up, hops immediately back down. Let's go. We're done.
Yeah, come, my friend. Our day's work has been quite long enough. It's a long walk to the school. They head back. Holmes actually sends off a telegram before he even goes to bed. But he tells Huxtable, I promise that before tomorrow evening, we shall have reached the solution of the mystery. So it's solved. I just got to go confront the guy who's responsible and finish it up. Huxtable is upset, and Watson says, I heard him late at night. I heard him consoling Dr. Huxtable, prostrated by the tragedy of his master's death. I don't know. Is he that upset over Heidegger dying, or is it more that they haven't found the Duke's son yet? It seemed like nobody liked Heidegger anyway. So, I mean, people are obvious in these stories as their feelings to people. If they don't like somebody and they die, they don't care. So I wonder, he's really that upset that Heidegger died? Well, no, obviously, clearly, if one of your masters is murdered and you're the most prestigious school.
That's also the newest bit of information because remember, like Huxtable found out the kid's been missing for days, and it was only hours ago that he learned that the German master has been murdered.
Horribly, like brutally.
Yeah, so like to your point, Ed, like yes, that could be a giant scandal for the school. It could be lots going on, but it is also the newest piece of information that Holmes and Huxtable haven't actually talked about.
And he's consoling him, which is an interesting word to use because I think people frequently, picture Holmes, and he gives us plenty of evidence of it, of how he doesn't consider his people feelings. I'm only trying to get at the truth here, and I'm going to be blunt and frank about things. But we also see him plenty of times when he is actually genuinely consoling to people emotionally. And we don't get the words here for that, but Watson is using the word consoling, and that is not an unusual thing for Sherlock Holmes, actually. All right, let's get to the end, the confrontation. You ordered the code red. That's this confrontation at the end here. They come to see you have come to see His Grace, Wilder says. I'm sorry, he can't see you.
Then we'll see him in bed.
Wait, well, I'm sorry. Before when they first see him, Wilder, demure and courtly, but with some trace of that wild terror of the night before still lurking in his furtive eyes and his twitching features. I mean, I'm sure it's not that, but it's they can see that he's clearly upset still. He tries to brush them off, but here's Holmes's cold and inexorable manner showed the secretary that it was useless to argue with him. Oh, he's in bed? Good. Then I'll go see him there.
I should see him there.
They find him at his desk, his red beard streaming down onto the table. It's not that long. I looked at the pictures. It's not long that it's streaming onto the table. I can't, I'm not going to reach the table yet, but, it'll take some time.
But this to me anchors back to the description of Huxtable in the beginning. There is something at odds with how these men should be perceived and how they are being perceived. There is like there is something the English major in me wants. The English major in me loves about this story because both of those people have some sort of disconnect about their description, but then Wilder has been nervous from the beginning, and Reuben Hayes is shifty immediately. Like there's simplicity in the middle and kind of like complexity at the edges or vice versa, depending how you think of it. And there's something about that again that I think is going to tie into the way Holmes interacts with all these people.
Yeah, I think so. I like that. The well, the questioning begins. Holmes sends Wilder away. We can speak more freely with him out of here. Um, the man turned a shade paler and cast a malignant glance at Holmes, but
And
Holmes,
then starts to, well, if your grace wishes, yes, you had better go,
yeah.
says the Duke.
Is that him, kind of letting the Duke think he's making the decision?
I mean, to me, I read it as Wilder trying not to let Holmes boss him around.
Oh wait, because I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. No, that's Wilder saying that. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Because it's like, well, if you want me to leave, Duke, I will. And the Duke's immediately like, yes, please go. You better go. Get out. Get out. Holmes said so, go.
Yep.
Wilder has no more power over the Duke right now.
Hence the malignant gaze.
And then Holmes starts this off with the so I hear there's a reward. And really draws it all out too. Like, has there's been a reward? Yes. Like it was what with £5,000? Yes. Was it another like draws this all out?
And then tries to get him to write the check first.
He does, yeah. And he says, and then he rubbed his thin hands together with an appearance of avidity, which was a surprise to me, who knew his frugal tastes. We know this. Holmes doesn't care about the money. We know this from all the past stories, but my question is, why is he playing it up so much? Is it because he's trying to make the Duke suffer in some kind of way here? Like, I want you to really be, I want to make you suffer for what's going on here. Like, please check.
He does kind of always make rich people pay. Like, if they can pay, he sort of makes them pay. Like, think of like although now that I say that, I'm thinking about the King of Bohemia and what he offers and how Holmes kind of like shuts that down.
I think we need to go through the rest too, because he's doing this is like, oh yes, it was 5,000, right? Plus another one. Plus, I assume this would include any people who are currently keeping him as opposed to just actively. And the Grace is described as the Duke is described as being impatient. Yes. If you do what you say, oh, you have your checkbook there. I see. This is my bank. And his Grace sat very stern and upright and looked stonily at my friend. Is this a joke, Mr. Holmes? Not at all, Your Grace. I was never more earnest in my life. I mean that I have earned the reward. I know where your son is, and I know who is keeping him. And at that point, the Duke's beard had turned more aggressively red than ever against his ghastly white face.
Yeah.
Where is he? He gasped. He was last night at the Fighting Cock. The Duke fell back in his chair. And whom do you accuse? Sherlock Holmes' answer was an astounding one. He stepped swiftly forward and touched the Duke upon the shoulder. I accuse you. And now, Your Grace, I'll trouble you for that check. Like, I think the order of operations in that whole little thing is read in its entirety. Because he comes in and says, you promised me this thing, right? Now, do the thing. Because Holmes knows the solution. You aren't behind this plot, but now you are. So it is a little bit of sweating it out, but it's also a little bit of bluffing. of the sort of like, yeah, I need the money, I need the money, I need it. Because I figured it out. And you did it.
It's very Columbo to bring back.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
It's a
Very
dramatic.
Columbo.
It's usually a courtroom moment too. You
Yeah.
know, like like it's you pulled the trigger,
It's
and but he's really building to that moment. So I think that's going on here as well, right?
I think this also is Holmes's interaction. Again, Holmes respects this guy to some extent, but he also understands him because the very next moment, sorry, I'm reading it all for you, Ed, but the next moment, I accuse
Read it all.
you, and now I'll trouble you for that check. Never shall I forget the Duke's appearance as he sprang up and clawed with his hand like one who is sinking into an abyss. Then, with an extraordinary effort of aristocratic self-command, he sat down and sank his face in his hands. It was some minutes before he spoke. How much do you know? He asked at last without raising his head. And I don't think you get that reaction to, you're behind it, Your Grace. If you come in that way,
Yeah.
you've got to impatient, you've got to put him off
Yeah.
back. Okay, fine. Yes, I will. Who do you? It's you. Okay, fine. How much do you know? Like, Holmes reads him perfectly.
Is that your sprang up and clawed with his hands? Like
That's my
that's a weird way to describe it too. Like what's he like? "Ah," like I don't get the melodrama, histrionic melodrama going on in Doyle's head when he describes that moment because it seems so bizarre, the standing up and claw.
Awkward posturing, but it is kind of the mirror image of how the case opens.
yes.
With Huxtable coming in and
Yep.
being completely composed, completely having it together, walking through the door, and then collapsing ridiculously on the floor. We've got the absolute dramatic, like impulsive gesture that then gathers itself, steals itself in its sort of noble aristocratic grace,
Yeah.
and is civil. And I think that's so interesting.
Doyle even comments that when he does his top 12 stories that he does for that contest, and he names what he thinks are his best 12 stories, Priory School is number 10. And Doyle wrote, I think also that the Priory School is worth a place, if only for the dramatic moment when Holmes points his finger at the Duke. Now, of course, he's metaphorically points his finger because he touches him on the shoulder when he does it. But Doyle himself recognized that this was a huge moment in a story and really worth everything that has come before it to culminate in this point. And there's a tiny thing there too that Holmes goes up and touches him on the shoulder.
This man.
This is a Duke.
Yeah.
This is such a huge breach of etiquette to physically touch someone like that.
Like tap him on the shoulder, like, oh, it's like I'm picturing like Duck Duck Goose.
Yeah.
Schoolyard, right?
You.
He's been gooped. But
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, that Holmes speaking truth to power always, and Holmes just absolutely not caring about, oh, Your Grace, the title. But he'll walk up and tap this guy on the shoulder.
Yeah.
And this is like the most respectful form of truth to power. Because again, he knows the Duke is not the villain. The Duke is not the one who is behind it all. So this is like it's funny to sort of say that like I know there's a reward. Could you get your checkbook out? Is softening the blow. It's weird to think of it that way.
It is, though.
It is, because it is not the sort of aggressive, like, you're the one behind it, you should be ashamed for your actions.
And he's almost pitying to the Duke when he tries to buy his way out of it, right? When he's like,
oh, no.
Not that easy.
Yeah, this is, how much do you know? And then Holmes sees them together, he tells him, and he's like, okay, I'll write you a check. And then he says, I think 12,000 pounds is the sum that I owe you. He's doubled what he is supposed to be paying him, which is his way of saying, and Holmes realizes it right away. It's his way of saying, and you'll keep quiet. But Holmes smiled and shook his head.
Right. Like, that was weirdly sympathetic. Sorry.
But then to your point, Mary gives him the honorific. I fear Your Grace, the matters can hardly be arranged so easily.
Yeah. There was a murder. So you can't, it's not, you can't get your way out of silence because someone was actually murdered. Um, and but James knew nothing of that. Holmes doesn't know that. Well, he does in this case, but then we'll get to the James in a moment that with the names. You can't hold him responsible. And Holmes says, when a man embarks upon a crime, he is morally guilty of any other crime which may spring from it. That there's a and Holmes is more concerned with moral justice than he is concerned with legal justice. He's proven that many times in his stories. Um, and the Duke, of course, is just morally, no doubt you're right, but not in the eyes of the law. He recognizes that too. And because of that, you can't, like, I have to, you must save him. He even says that you must, Mr. Holmes, you must save him. You must save him. I tell you, you must save him. Um, uh, and then he is not the murderer. And Holmes says he's not the murderer. And he says, no, the murderer has escaped. And Holmes like, no, and then he gets the other big reveal. No, he didn't. Uh, he's actually arrested this morning. Uh, so that was the telegram he sent to arrest Reuben Hayes. Um, Luckily, he knew where he was going. But maybe it was an all points bulletin. Um, look for a guy with ironical eyes and a dog and,
Got it. That guy. Go get
and,
him. Go get him,
and
Jimmy.
a black oily pipe. There you go. Uh, so but I love this part here. You've seen that powers that are hardly human, I'm right. Hayes is taken. I'm right glad to hear if it will not react upon the fate of James, your secretary? No, sir, my son. And it was Holmes's turn to look astonished. Now, I I don't like if we reread.
Sorry. Next line too. Next line too is part of it.
I confess that this is entirely new to me, Your Grace. I must beg of you to be more explicit.
Your Grace, I must beg of you to be
Yeah.
more explicit.
He's playing into this. Like,
Yeah.
this is the way that I get you to be honest with me if I show the right respect, especially after I just touched you on the shoulder.
And I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like Holmes and the Duke have a different relationship than Holmes and a rich guy who thinks he can just take whatever he wants.
Yeah.
That's what Holmes resists. That's what Holmes doesn't like. Because he doesn't even like that with like not rich people. He doesn't like that kind of like, oh no, I'll be fine then, right? Like it's not exactly the same when he threatens James Ryder in the Blue Carbuncle, but it is flavors of that, right? Where it's like, oh, I'll be fine then. And Holmes is like, you don't get anything for free. You can't. I owe you nothing. And he's more incensed at aristocracy who thinks people owe them things, but Holmes will not brook that with anyone.
And Holmes to now find out that Wilder is his son. This is what has shocks him. This is what he has not figured out. And usually in a story, Holmes figures things out because, oh, you have the same ears, so I knew you were related. Kind of like
Yeah.
there's some Doyle loves the hereditary. I mean, everything you inherit, But
that's
this
right.
one, he doesn't put that in the story. So, and I think it was good for him not to put that in the story especially for first readers to come across it. If he had mentioned at any point there was some similarity in the two, you might have put it together something before he wants you to put it together.
If anything, they are driven apart. They are described
Yeah.
differently all the
Yeah.
time.
Yes, they are. I love that the thing that Holmes can't puzzle out or doesn't puzzle out exactly is the human equation.
Yeah.
Human relationship between why he's protecting his secretary. Like, what is the relationship between these two? That he can't puzzle out. All the physical evidence he's fine with.
Mhm.
The logic of it, he
The
gets.
action of the murderers, the lot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wild is connected with the innkeeper, and the innkeeper's done the murder, and like I
Things that are
get
done for
this.
money, things that are done for power.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a weird one.
I can imagine he must have thought that Wilder had only been in this to get to share in the ransom. But then when he
And
found out there was a murder, he got upset and then led the Duke to the inn. But he doesn't seem to think that this is what's going on. This is new for Sherlock.
And to be fair, remember, like we talked about this, like Holmes's responsibility to his client. He has been asked to find who took what happened to the boy and who is holding him. Kind of figuring out why is like is an unnecessary cherry on top. That's not why I'm here. It's the same. It's true of any like murder, like
Yeah.
the implicit question is who did it, not why did they do it. And figuring out why can help, but it's entirely uninteresting to some of the cases.
And modern mysteries, and what makes mysteries more important or more appealing to people is the motive factor.
Right.
So, so we think that that's what happens, that they find a motive and then that's what leads it. But it's also true that modern police methods too often rely on finding a motive in order to be able to connect things. But that's just realistic because sometimes there's just a dearth of evidence anyway. And if you don't get a motive, you can't connect people with something. We find out that the Duke had this love affair. It was, love that as comes only once in a lifetime. So even
Wonder the Duchess went somewhere else.
Yeah.
Hearing that.
Yeah. And
that just reads the story and is like, I'm not moving home.
And
yeah, I'm staying in France.
And she wouldn't marry him, this first one, even though she got pregnant. She refused it on the grounds that such a match might mar my career. I mean, as a realistic reader, I'm thinking like, yeah, it was probably the other way around. But he says that she refused it, and then James, but he took care of James. James actually confronted him with it. It's not like he even told James one day, like, you're my son. James found out and then used it to hold power.
Power over the Duke. Yeah.
Hated the legitimate heir. I answer that it was because why did I keep him under my roof? Because I could see his mother's face in his. I could not send him away, but I feared so lest he should do Arthur, that is Lord Saltire, a mischief. And that's why he sent him to the school. This I don't know. I think in the end it's belief. People do stupider things than this. And it is dumb, but he falls for it, and I can believe that he would fall for this.
The last tie to the woman he loved so much, and he can't quite bring himself to break that tie, and especially when he looks so much like her, and that's why he doesn't look like the Duke.
He looks like the mama.
Mother.
He says, but in some extraordinary way, James became intimate with him, meaning the Reuben Hayes. He had always a taste for low company. And that's a big signifier for Doyle, too, because Doyle is absolutely a believer in inherited nobility, that if you have some kind of noble strain in you, you suddenly have it, and you look it and you play the part, and you can't help it. You're a prince by blood. Not in this case. And I think it's probably because the mom was not.
It's a weird incrimination of this woman who has been held up as this like absolute angelic kind of selfless creature, but she can't help that there's a certain lowness to her, and that strain is in the child.
Well, he lures the other son away, and he's been held at the Fighting Cock, where he was confined in an upper room under the care of Mrs. Hayes, who is a kindly woman, but entirely under the control of her brutal husband. So it's all Reuben Hayes' fault, is what everybody's saying. Everybody says it's all Reuben Hayes' fault. Poor James. He didn't mean anything bad to happen. I just meant to kidnap him so you would give me all of your money. James is as dumb as, as it comes to, if he's thinking that. And Holmes realizes, first James found out that Heidegger was dead, and was so upset, and he voluntarily confessed, and I went off to see my son, and he's okay. And Holmes is like, you left him there? That, Holmes first, you condoned a felony, aided the escape of a murderer. That's not good. And because of course you obviously gave money for Reuben Hayes to run away. But then even more culpable, in my opinion, is your attitude towards your younger son. You leave him in this den for 3 days. Now, it's not 3 days since now. It's obviously only, the day before that he found out, I think, right? Wilder found out there was a murder. That's why we saw him riding on the bike real fast to get the Duke, and the Duke comes and it was like, oh, this is terrible. You better stay here tonight, son.
Right. Yeah. Stay here.
Really?
Nobody touch him, or I'll come back and do nothing.
Yeah. Um, Holmes is equally horrified, as I think anybody should be, that he left his son there for another night. Um, and Holmes says to the servants, it's like, go get the Duke's son. He's at the Fighting Cock.
Sorry, I want to rewind just a paragraph or two, because Holmes has that moment of like, you behaved despicably, and the proud Lord of Holderness was not accustomed to being so rated in his own hall. The blood flushed into his high forehead, but his conscience held him dumb.
Mhm.
And then Holmes is like, I'll help you, but on one condition: you ring for your footman and let me give him such orders as I like. Without a word, the Duke pressed the bell.
Yeah.
And like, again, like, to your point earlier, Mary, there's no, well, like, he's tried and it didn't work. And at that point, yep, absolutely. What do you need? Bing. You do it, Mr. He doesn't even know what Holmes is going to say.
But
Just trusts that Holmes is going to help him, because Holmes said he would. And their relationship up until this point has been kind of collegiate
yeah,
in some way.
And Holmes has appeared supernatural and everything that he's
Mhm.
figured out. And like the Duke's like, okay, like this is not the person you argue with, the person has figured everything out before he was told what was going on.
and he doesn't try to bullshit Holmes.
Yeah.
And I think Holmes respects.
He didn't do it in the first interview. He's not doing it now.
Right.
The now we get the one of the more unbelievable, well, a couple things that are like, really? The first that Holmes says, well, Hayes is caught. Okay. Not in an official position. I'm not the police, so there's no reason, as long as the ends of justice are served, why I should disclose all of that. So, all right, I can keep quiet about that as long as we make sure justice happens. Hayes is going to go to the gallows anyway, and I would do nothing to save him from it. And then he says, I have no doubt your grace could make him understand that it is to his interest to be silent. Well, that's completely wrong, right? No, I mean, money for what? He's going to hang him.
Right.
Wife.
But that he cares? Like, this isn't like the way he's been described. This is the kind of guy who's going to be like, you're going to pay me to keep quiet and I die? What, my wife's going to get this money? What do I care? If I talk, I might be able to cut a deal.
But he killed the guy. Like, it doesn't get it. I see you nodding, Mary. Like, this is one where, again, Doyle wants to wrap these stories up in neat little bows. So we gotta kind of assert some things here. But that's sort of bit of a, like, I'm not gonna stop him. He killed a guy. But I'm sure you can use your leverage and influence to do what you need to do. And one of the things I like is that Holmes leaves it kind of open. And he's like, and no doubt your grace could make him understand. It is in his interest to be silent.
Yep. And doesn't say how, and Holmes is gonna look the other way for that.
Mhm.
Doesn't need
Yeah.
to. He's not.
Yes, and it's never his interest to stay quiet, actually. His only interest is to talk. That's the leverage that Reuben Hayes would have. Now, maybe Reuben Hayes isn't that smart and wouldn't be able to figure that out, but his interest would be to threaten the Duke, that I will let people know that your secretary and you were involved. I will tell people that you were at the house and my wife will testify that you even came there, kind
I
of
mean,
thing.
Holmes could also be
Yeah.
subtly suggesting that the Duke just have him killed.
There
Like,
you go.
Like but it is Holmes very much like, look, man, this is your problem. And I am sure
It would be justice for Holmes.
Solve it.
I'm sure you can figure out this problem, right?
Right. I'm not the cops. You could figure it out.
I'm not going to say anything. I don't know anything.
Right.
There you go. That would work for this. Well, the other part is Wilder is going to leave forever and go to seek his fortune in Australia.
Yes, because it's a danger to have this man in your home.
Continued presence can only lead to misfortune.
Gonna kill your.
We've had this before, and Hound. The most egregious was in Hound when they were going to send. The plan was before the Hound actually got him was to send Selden, the Notting Hill murderer, to South America, and everybody was like, "That's a good solution. Yeah, he'll just go to South America."
Well, as long as he's not in England.
Yeah. As long as you're not murdering anybody here, I guess you're good. As long as you're not kidnapping any children in England, go to Australia.
It's the imperialist logic of a savage person to a savage land.
Yep.
You've sort of like shed your Englishness. You've disowned it, you've dishonored it, and now must live among savages.
It's not shedding, it's forsaking. It is, I have given up that part of me.
Yeah.
Go to the colonies.
Yeah.
You don't get to stay here.
Right.
Well, Holmes has one last thing here that he has to solve. He has to take care of. I would suggest that you make such amends as you can to the Duchess and that you try to resume those relations which have been so unhappily interrupted. There you go.
And he already has.
Nothing.
And he already has. That's the thing. The Duke is like, I wrote to her this morning.
Yep. Marriage advice from Holmes is a rare thing in stories.
And Watson says no. Watson holds his tongue.
Well, that's also the way that the Holmes thinks that like this boy will be okay if the mother is here.
And the brother and the half brother is not.
Yeah, and the half brother is not. So I can't trust you to make decisions on your own. But if your wife is here, perhaps that it will be better for your son.
And of course, because Holmes doesn't know that Wilder was his son, he is putting these thoughts together in real time.
Yeah.
But the Duke, who knew, has already done it.
Which is cool.
Which is really cool. Again, they're on the same level.
Mm-hmm. But Holmes needs to know about the mystery of the shoes.
Yes, because he still has to figure that. My friend and I can congratulate ourselves upon several most happy results. But wait, just one more thing. This is Columbo coming out here. One more thing.
Before we get to the reveal, this is another bit of Holmes' deduction. Shows how Holmes' thinking. Reuben Hayes had shod his horses with shoes that counterfeited the tracks of cows. Holmes has never seen these things. Holmes has no idea where he got the idea, doesn't care, knows he did it. Yep. And so he's now curious. Yeah. But it is perfect Sherlock Holmes crime-solving deduction to be like, this is the only thing that I could say to make it not impossible. Yeah. I have no proof that these things exist, but they must. Done. Yeah. How did he get the idea?
He also loves that tying up that last detail. I can remember in the Sign of Four, like, wait a minute, did you bring the rope?
Yeah.
Like after everything is done, it's all finished, and he's like,
I knew about all of this, but I didn't know where he got them.
I just have one question. Yeah.
He takes him to a glass case in the corner. The inscription, these shoes were dug up in the moat of Holderness Hall. The shape of cloven feet, instead of the horseshoe to trick people, or for these marauding barons in the Middle Ages, and they were using them to trick people. Doyle actually got this story from the Strand magazine. This is in the May issue of 1903, in a little article here on curiosities. featuring women who can climb walls. Um, and
Maybe they
also,
invented women then.
and also
But
this
they invented ground women by then.
Oh.
And also, to baffle pursuit, these false horseshoes were found in the moat at Bertsmorton Court near Tewkesbury. It is supposed that they were used in the time of the Civil Wars so as to deceive any person tracking the marks. The one on the left is supposed to leave the mark of a cow's hoof. And you can see there's like a hoof here raised on top of the horseshoe. And the one on the right, that of a child's foot, looks more like a fish. Like, oh, somebody was placing fish all over the ground here. I'm not quite sure how this would turn out when you pressed it down. But this is from Miss Alice E. Lewis, Coombe Hill, near Cheltenham.
How long was this before the story?
Just before he wrote. He's writing these stories in the spring and I guess the summer. I think he's done by the fall writing the ones that are, yeah, he's definitely done by the fall, but it's right around the time that he's writing it too. This is actually, it fits perfectly. That this is where he must have gotten this idea. And it's in the Strand. Oh, I should look up. I think there, I should look up to see if there's another story of his in the Strand too, and there probably is. He hasn't restarted the return yet in the Strand. In May, that's June? No, or is that not till September? I can't remember of '03. I think it's September '03. That or September, October is the empty house, I think. So he's writing the stories, and clearly this is where they got a little clue there for Ted. Let me add that to the story. And you don't get it to the very end. It's not, it's not like a key part. It's a key part for something that kind of confuses Holmes, but he doesn't need to know it to solve the case. And so it just is a nice little thing at the end here. And then and Holmes sees that there's mud on one of the ones, the Dukes here. These were the ones that were used. That's for people that are finally maybe putting it together, that's the tracks that, the tracks showed that it wasn't a cow jumping because there was also a canter track and a gallop track, and the cows don't leave the same marks like that. Cows just leave the straight line. It is the second most interesting object that I have seen in the North.
And the first?
Holmes folded up his check and placed it carefully in his notebook. I am a poor man, said he, and he patted it affectionately and thrust it into the depths of his inner pocket. A little joke, but it's also sticking it to the Duke. Thanks. And there's much debate as to whether it's 6,000 or 12. I can't imagine it's not 12. I can't imagine the Duke pulled back after saying 12. But it's still a lot of money. You can do those computations, but the point is it's a lot of money. It's several times what he was going to make in a year on regular cases. So
I like that the story does not specify what the check is for. It's just it comes. Here's the other thing. Because Holmes has done I see your checkbook so long ago in terms of narrative time, it's this return to the idea of like, oh yes, thank you. And he takes, it's just this return to this idea that we've actually kind of forgotten about in the midst of, no, sir, my son, and the Duke, and what Reuben Hayes is caught, and but I will take your money for this. Well, you should get your marriage back together. You should get your kid out of there, but I will take your money
because I earned it.
I did, and he says
did exactly what you said. You people had to do to get this reward, and I have earned my reward, and thank you very much.
Yep, because at the end, it's business. This is all business.
Absolutely.
Well, is it just business? Is it just and that is absolutely part of it. Holmes likes the fact that he's figured this out and he's earned this, but is it also, and you need to pay for this in some way? Because you're not paying zip. Like you haven't suffered at all for this in a sense. I mean, except for the anguish of the last few days, the Duke gets to walk away scot-free.
Yeah, speaking his
though,
language, right?
yeah,
The language of money. You can't make it go away, but you still have to pay for it,
yeah.
actually, in
This
fact.
is also
Like you were
problem.
gonna, yeah.
No, no, go ahead, keep going.
You were gonna pay me to make your problem go away for you. And you were gonna pay until you felt it, and you're still gonna pay until you feel it, but the problem's not gonna go away for you.
Yeah, that's a great point because the reward is offered before he knows that James is involved. Yeah, you get all this personal hardship. And remember, when they go to see him at the end, he's in bed. Like
Yeah.
and there's a description of him where he is like a much changed man. His face was more cadaverous than ever. His shoulders had rounded, and he seemed to be an altogether older man than he had been the morning before.
Yeah.
So like, and then
Wilder
Holmes,
says he's in bed, but he's not when they go in.
right?
He's in
They meet
the
him at the desk, yeah. But there is a sort of like, oh, all of that and 6,000 pounds.
Yeah. Is this story a classic?
Well, an instant classic, isn't it?
Deserves to be.
I really love this story. I think this story
Forgot
was
how much I love this story. It's been a very
exceptionally
long
well
time
done.
since I revisited this story, and I had forgotten how really excellent it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like easily
Yeah.
up in the top tiers.
I mean, for me, it's all that look into Holmes investigating and piecing something together, and that's really exciting to see.
You got beautifully drawn supporting characters
Yeah.
in all of them. Coming in, you've got this. You've got a mystery that seems very confusing until you work out what actually happened, and then that seems like the only possible explanation. And
You've
then
Holmes and Watson working together.
You got Holmes and Watson on the case together. You've got the investigating. You've also got that fun. You got that. I mean, Doyle recognized the scene with the Duke at the end, and like you have so much more interesting stuff than just detective and mystery as well. You have a lot more going on here, and again, the sort of like Mona Lisa aspect of how much is the check for? Because like the story is never specific when he actually writes it or gives it. Holmes just has it in the last line. So like it's really unclear when Holmes takes the money from him.
Even the most bizarre, weird ass clue thing, the hoofs, doesn't really matter. It's just like, I'm just going to throw that in at the end because the story's strong enough. He doesn't need to, like, that doesn't need to be a key for him solving the case to make this a good story. All those pieces are already there. And we get that extra little bit at the end, which is so much fun.
I am a poor man.
Yeah.
Bearskin rug isn't paying for itself.
Yeah. that King of Bohemia money, that King of Bohemia money's starting to run out. Well, Sherlockians, thank you. We went for a long one today, but I couldn't, pause this at any point. Thank you for joining us for episode 36 of Sherlock Monthly. Mary and Nick, my gosh, thank you both so much. This is a lot of fun talking to two of you. So
thank you, Ed. Oh, this was so much fun.
I'd love to bring you back. Mary knows I want her on for every show as I want some of these.
I am always up for it. I'm always into it.
All righty. Coming up next month, we will return to talk about the adventure of the Black Peter. And Max McGee, who is in the chat today, I saw, will be co-hosting. And also Glenn Moranker, who is the current owner of the Black Peter manuscript, will also be on. We could talk about that with Glenn. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Monthly, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org, and which I mentioned we're doing a little maintenance there. So Pache, if you can't if your the links that I put in the chat are absolutely work to donate or become a member. Again, let me remind everybody to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. Mary, Nick, thanks again, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library. where the game is always a book. And Mary and Nick, hang on a second. We'll play this and then I will stop the stream and I'll see you in just a second. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks so much. Beauty. I ended the stream.